Have you ever felt like someone was pulling invisible strings in your life, subtly twisting your emotions, lowering your standards, or making you question your own sanity? These aren't accidents. They're deliberate psychological tactics designed to keep you controlled without you even realizing it. In this video, we'll uncover the darkest manipulation patterns, love bombing, gaslighting, silent treatments, and more, that erode confidence, silence truth, and keep you trapped in cycles of doubt. By the end, you won't just see these red flags. You'll recognize them, call them out, and take back your power. So, if you're ready to break free from toxic influence, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today. Negative mirroring. Negative mirroring is one of the most subtle yet damaging psychological tactics because it doesn't look like an attack at first glance. Instead of mirroring comfort, warmth, or understanding, it reflects back unease, coldness, and defensiveness. When someone mirrors your negative body language, crossed arms, a furrowed brow, a stiff posture, it doesn't just acknowledge your tension, it intensifies it. You suddenly feel as if your discomfort has been validated, and worse, multiplied. Instead of calming the atmosphere, the manipulator silently feeds it with more unease, creating a loop where your stress bounces back at you. This tactic works because humans are wired to notice and respond to nonverbal signals. A room can shift in seconds depending on the mood that is being mirrored within it. Negative mirroring taps into this instinct, turning normal discomfort into full-blown anxiety. It's a tool often used in negotiations, arguments, or power struggles, where the goal is not connection, but control. Over time, it can leave the target emotionally drained, second-guessing themselves, and unsure why the interaction felt so toxic. Unlike shouting or insults, negative mirroring hides in plain sight. It feels coincidental, as though both people just happen to be tense at the same time. But that coincidence is precisely the manipulation. It makes the victim question themselves while the manipulator gains quiet control of the emotional tone. What makes it dangerous is not its noise, but its silence, not its directness, but its ability to infect the environment, until the victim feels overwhelmed without ever knowing why. Intermittent validation. Intermittent validation is not ordinary praise or affection. It's one of the most addictive forms of emotional control. Instead of giving care consistently, the manipulator offers it randomly and unpredictably, creating a cycle that feels thrilling at first, but slowly becomes tormenting. This tactic mirrors the psychology of gambling. A slot machine doesn't pay every time, but the unpredictability of its reward keeps people hooked for hours. In the same way, when affection or praise is given only occasionally, it doesn't make the receiver walk away. It makes them chase harder. You find yourself waiting for the next kind word, the next warm gesture, the next moment of attention, and because you never know when it will come, you invest more and more energy in the relationship. The highs feel euphoric precisely because they follow periods of neglect or coldness, but when the warmth disappears again, it leaves behind confusion, emptiness, and insecurity. You begin asking yourself what you did wrong, whether you changed, why you suddenly feel invisible. Slowly your focus shifts, not on whether the relationship is healthy, but on what you can do to win back the fleeting affection. Over time, your emotional compass gets hijacked. You are no longer guided by your own needs or boundaries, but by the constant hope of earning validation. The cruelty of intermittent validation lies in how much it feels like real love at first. The attention is genuine enough to make you believe in it, but inconsistent enough to keep you hooked. It disguises manipulation as passion, control as intimacy. The manipulator uses it strategically, praising when they want something, disappearing when they want control, and reappearing just enough to reignite your hunger. This cycle keeps you trapped, blaming yourself for the inconsistency, unaware that it was never about you, it was always about the hook. Information starvation. Information starvation is one of the most insidious forms of psychological control because it doesn't look like an attack. It looks like silence, omission, or forgetfulness. But make no mistake, it is deliberate. This tactic thrives on imbalance. One person holds the information, while the other is left in the dark, forced to stumble through confusion and doubt. At first, it may feel harmless. Someone forgets to mention a small detail, skips an explanation, or leaves out context. You brush it off as oversight. But with time, a disturbing pattern emerges. You find yourself constantly behind, always a step late, always dependent on them for clarity. And they always seem to have the answers they withheld until it benefited them. This tactic works because humans crave understanding. Information is security, and when it's denied, we feel unsteady, vulnerable, and dependent. In relationships, this can look like someone never fully explaining their actions, intentions, or whereabouts, leaving you guessing and overanalyzing. You reread texts, decode half-truths, and torture yourself with questions they could have answered easily. In professional settings, information starvation can paralyze you. A boss may withhold context about a project, leaving you unprepared, only to swoop in later and appear more competent than you. A colleague may keep resources to themselves, making you look ineffective. What makes this manipulation so damaging is that silence feels less hostile than lies. You don't see it as betrayal, you see it as a gap you need to fill, and so you shrink yourself, doubting your memory, your instincts, even your worth. You tiptoe, careful not to ask too much, afraid of appearing insecure or needy. By the time you realize what's happening, you have already internalized the hunger for clarity. You're running on scraps of truth, conditioned to wait for the crumbs they choose to give you. The manipulation isn't in what's said, it's in what's never said. And that quiet starvation can hollow you out until you're too weak to question why you were denied in the first place. Time Confusional. Time Confusional is a disorienting manipulation that targets something we all rely on, our sense of time and memory. It's not about changing the clock on the wall. It's about bending your perception of when things happened, how long they lasted, or whether they even occurred the way you remember. A manipulator may insist that an argument happened just last week when you know it was a month ago. They may swear they never promised you something you vividly recall. They may claim closure was reached when you still feel unresolved. Each small distortion chips away at your confidence in your own memory. This tactic is especially damaging because time is how we orient ourselves. It's how we make sense of experiences, track progress, and assign meaning to events. When someone rewrites that timeline, they aren't just changing dates, they are rewriting emotional weight. A painful event minimized as already forgiven pressures you to move on before you're ready. A delayed resolution keeps you suspended in anxiety, unable to heal. By stretching or compressing time, manipulators gain control of your emotions, your recovery, and even your identity. In toxic relationships, this tactic can make you feel like you're losing your mind. They insist that something happened differently, and because they are so certain, you start to wonder if your memory is faulty. In workplaces, it can be used to distort accountability. A manager may claim deadlines were agreed upon earlier than they were, painting you as irresponsible. In families, it shows up when someone minimizes long-standing pain by acting as though it happened ages ago and should no longer matter. The cruelty of time confusional lies in its subtlety. It doesn't outright deny reality. It twists it just enough to make you question your own. And once you start doubting your sense of time, you begin to depend on the manipulator to tell you what happened, when, and how to interpret it. Your timeline is no longer yours. It belongs to them. And with that, your past becomes shaky ground, your present filled with doubt, and your future vulnerable to their control. Reverse projection. Reverse projection is a psychological trick that feels like having the ground pulled out from under you. At its core, it is accusing someone else of the very behavior the accuser is secretly guilty of. It's not defense, it's offense. Instead of addressing their wrongdoing, they throw the spotlight on you, leaving you scrambling to defend yourself against something you didn't even do. Imagine being accused of dishonesty by the very person who has been lying to you, or being called controlling by someone who has been suffocating your independence. The accusation shocks you, destabilizes you, and before you know it, you're arguing your innocence instead of questioning theirs. This tactic works because it hijacks your natural sense of accountability. Most people who care about integrity will pause when accused, reflect, and wonder, could I really be at fault here? That moment of doubt is the opening manipulator's exploit. While you're busy defending your name, they've shifted attention away from their own behavior. The brilliance of reverse projection is in its timing. It's often deployed when their actions are close to being exposed. Instead of facing consequences, they launch a preemptive strike, projecting their own flaws onto you with such conviction that you start to question your truth. In close relationships, this is devastating. The accusations feel personal, because they are crafted from your vulnerabilities. They know what stings, what will make you pause, and what will throw you into a spiral of self-doubt. At work, it can look like a colleague accusing you of poor teamwork when they are the one withholding support. In friendships, it's the friend who accuses you of gossip when they are the one spreading secrets. The cruelty of reverse projection lies in how it weaponizes your goodness against you. The more honest, accountable, and self-aware you are, the more likely you are to be crushed by the weight of a false accusation. You bend over backwards to prove your innocence while they walk away appearing righteous and unbothered. By the time you realize the accusations were never about you, you've already accepted blame, apologized, and allowed them to escape the very accountability they deserved. Strategic vagueness. Strategic vagueness is a masterful form of manipulation that hides behind unclear words and ambiguous promises. It's not forgetfulness, nor is it poor communication. It is precision disguised as confusion. The manipulator knows exactly what they are doing when they say "I'll try," or "we'll see," or "that's not what I meant." On the surface, these phrases seem harmless, even flexible, but beneath them is a carefully constructed fog meant to protect the manipulator from responsibility. They give just enough to be heard, but never enough to be held accountable. The danger of strategic vagueness lies in the way it transfers the burden of clarity onto you. You are left trying to fill in the blanks, interpret the meaning, and guess at the true intention. In relationships, this might look like a partner who promises change soon, but never defines what soon means. At work, it could be a manager who vaguely outlines expectations, only to later criticize you for not meeting a standard that was never clearly defined. Even in friendships, it may appear as someone dropping a hurtful comment, but denying responsibility by saying, "That's not what I said, you misunderstood." What makes this tactic so frustrating is its deniability. If you confront them, they retreat further into vagueness, insisting you twisted their words, that you're too sensitive, or that you're looking for problems. Suddenly, the focus shifts from their lack of honesty to your supposed overreaction. Over time, this dynamic erodes trust. You stop feeling confident in what you heard or understood, and instead you start doubting yourself. Strategic vagueness creates a mirage of communication. It feels like clarity is there, but when you reach for it, it dissolves. And the manipulator benefits from this fog. They stay unaccountable while you stay confused, always trying to read between the lines of words that were never meant to be clear in the first place. Their true goal isn't to connect, it's to avoid responsibility while keeping you engaged in their endless riddles. Expectation baiting. Expectation baiting is one of the cruelest emotional traps because it disguises manipulation as generosity. It begins with an extraordinary act, a grand gesture, an overwhelming display of kindness, or a moment of surprising selflessness. You feel touched, even amazed, thinking you've been given something rare and beautiful. But what you don't realize is that this act was never meant to be repeated. It wasn't a gift, it was bait. Once the gesture is made, it becomes a measuring stick that you are forever held against. The manipulator will remind you of it, subtly or directly, and guilt you for never matching it. You may have shown up in countless smaller, consistent ways, but those are overlooked. Instead, the one grand act overshadows everything, and you are left feeling ungrateful or selfish for not being able to reach the standard they set. In reality, the standard was never meant to be achievable. In relationships, expectation baiting often sounds like, "After everything I did for you, you can't even do this one thing for me." At work, it may look like a boss who praises you for one outstanding project, then uses it to pressure you endlessly, expecting that same level of effort without support. In families, it can show up when a parent recalls one sacrifice they made decades ago, using it as leverage for obedience and guilt throughout your life. The manipulation works because it exploits your natural instinct toward fairness. You want to reciprocate, to prove yourself worthy of the love or effort you received. But the trap is that the bar was never meant for them. It was always meant for you. They don't hold themselves to that same standard. They gave you something extraordinary once so that they could weaponize it against you forever. Expectation baiting turns love and care into a form of debt. It shifts connection into obligation, kindness into guilt. And over time, you stop feeling free in the relationship. You start feeling burdened, constantly proving yourself to someone who already decided they would never match your effort. They don't want equality, they want leverage. False dilemma trap. The false dilemma trap is one of the most deceptive mind games because it looks like logic, when in fact it is control disguised as choice. It presents you with two stark, often extreme options, neither of which you want, and pressures you to choose between them. What you don't see is that a third, carefully crafted option has already been planted, the one the manipulator wanted you to pick all along. By boxing you into extremes, they steer you toward the path that feels like relief, but is actually surrender. This tactic preys on our natural response to pressure. When we feel cornered, we don't always ask, "Is there another way?" Instead, we ask, "What's the lesser evil?" And in that panic, we accept terms that aren't fair, simply because they feel less painful than the alternatives. In relationships, this might sound like, "Either you forgive me completely right now, or we break up forever." At work, it could be, "Take on this overwhelming workload, or risk being seen as uncommitted." In politics, it appears when leaders frame issues in black and white terms, pushing people toward the reasonable compromise that was their real goal all along. The genius of the false dilemma trap is that it doesn't look like coercion. It looks like compromise. You walk away thinking you chose freely, when in reality, your choices were an illusion. And because the manipulator framed the situation, you feel grateful for the solution they offered, even if it still hurts you. The emotional trap here is urgency. The manipulator makes it feel like you must decide now. That hesitation equals disaster. Your mind narrows, panic sets in, and you don't see the door behind you. You only see the two walls they built in front of you. By the time you agree, you feel relieved just to escape the extremes. But that relief blinds you to the fact that you never actually had freedom. The false dilemma trap hijacks your agency. It doesn't just trick you into compliance. It tricks you into believing it was your choice. And that is the deepest wound of all, cognitive flooding. Cognitive flooding is a psychological ambush designed to overwhelm the mind until clear thinking becomes impossible. It isn't about presenting information to help you understand. It's about drowning you in so much data, so many words, so many rapid-fire arguments that your brain gives up trying to process it all. The manipulator uses speed, volume, and intensity as their weapons. They might talk so quickly that you can't interrupt, jump from one topic to another before you've finished processing the first, or bombard you with studies, facts, and memories you don't recall. It doesn't even matter if what they're saying is true. What matters is that your brain becomes overloaded, unable to filter out noise from truth. This tactic often masquerades as intelligence or passion. The manipulator appears confident, persuasive, and informed, but beneath the surface, their real goal is disorientation. The human brain can only handle so many inputs at once, and when that limit is exceeded, especially in moments of stress, your survival instincts take over. Instead of analyzing, you freeze. Instead of resisting, you comply. You might nod just to make the barrage stop, agree to something you didn't fully understand, or even apologize for things you never did. In emotionally charged moments, cognitive flooding is devastating. A partner who has betrayed you may unleash a torrent of justifications, accusations, and whataboutism so fast that the original issue disappears in the chaos. By the end, you feel guilty, confused, or exhausted, even though you were the one wronged. At work, a boss may overwhelm you with conflicting instructions and endless critiques until you feel incapable of doing anything right. In cults or toxic groups, it can take the form of long, repetitive lectures that leave members too tired to think critically. The chilling truth is that cognitive flooding doesn't need to convince you of anything. It only needs to silence your ability to resist. A flooded mind is not a free mind. It's a mind in survival mode, searching for escape. And the manipulator is waiting at that exit, ready to offer the solution of compliance. What makes this tactic so dangerous is its invisibility. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like confusion, like being too slow, too weak, too unprepared. But the reality is clear. The chaos was never your fault. It was engineered to break your clarity so they could replace it with control. Identity provocation. Identity provocation is a deeply cutting manipulation because it doesn't just target what you do, it targets who you are. Rather than criticize your actions, the manipulator plants seeds of doubt in your self-image, questioning the very traits you value most about yourself. It begins subtly, often cloaked as observation or even concern. They might say, "You used to be more ambitious," or "That's not like you," or "Wow, I didn't think you would act that way." These words seem small, but they land with precision, poking at your identity until you start to wonder if they're right. We all build our lives around certain core beliefs about ourselves: loyal, kind, strong, intelligent, creative. Identity provocation weaponizes these labels, suggesting that maybe you're not who you think you are. Suddenly, you're not just defending a decision, you're defending your entire sense of self. In romantic relationships, this might sound like, "I thought you were the mature one." In families, it might come as, "You've really changed. You're not the person we raised." In professional settings, it could be, "I expected more from someone like you." Each statement slices away at your confidence, not by attacking your actions, but by shaking your foundation. This tactic is so powerful because it makes you complicit in your own manipulation. Instead of rejecting the insult, you start to prove yourself. You work harder to be who they claim you're not. If they say you're selfish, you overgive. If they say you're weak, you push yourself past exhaustion to appear strong. In the process, you stop living authentically and start living reactively, bending yourself to fit their distorted version of you. Over time, identity provocation erodes trust in your own perception. You begin to wonder if you even know who you are anymore. You may feel the constant need for reassurance from SleepDoze, a very person undermining you, desperate to reclaim the self-image they chipped away. And that's the trap. By destabilizing your identity, they make you dependent on their version of reality. You lose faith in your reflection and cling to theirs, even though it diminishes you. The cruelty of identity provocation is that it strikes at the deepest human need: to feel whole, to feel known, to feel seen. And when someone uses that need against you, the wound doesn't just bruise your confidence, it fractures your core. Urgency Mirage. The urgency mirage is a high-pressure manipulation that fabricates a ticking clock where none exists. It creates the illusion that you must act now, decide now, commit now, or risk losing everything. This sense of immediacy hijacks your rational mind and forces you into a state of panic, where survival instincts override careful thought. The manipulator doesn't want you calm and reflective. They want you rushed, desperate, and blind to your own boundaries. This tactic exploits one of our deepest fears, the fear of loss. When urgency is in the air, our brain narrows. We don't think about long-term consequences. We think about securing what we believe might slip away. This is why salespeople push limited-time offers and scammers insist that opportunities vanish in hours. But it isn't just sales. In relationships, a manipulative partner might say, "If you don't decide tonight, I'll take it as a no," forcing you into choices you aren't ready to make. In workplaces, bosses may pressure you with artificial deadlines, leaving you scrambling and guilty if you can't meet them. In toxic friendships, someone may demand instant loyalty, framing hesitation as betrayal. The brilliance of the urgency mirage is that it makes you act before you can consult your intuition. When you're trapped in that false countdown, you don't pause to ask, "Is this fair? Is this right for me? Do I even want this?" Instead, you leap into compliance just to stop the clock. And later, when the fog clears, regret sets in. You realize you would never have agreed if you had been given space to breathe. What makes this tactic so dangerous is its speed. It doesn't give you the luxury of reflection. It severs your access to clarity. Once urgency takes hold, you're no longer choosing, you're reacting. You're not exercising freedom, you're scrambling to survive. And manipulators know this. They know that the faster you feel time slipping away, the less likely you are to see through the illusion. Because the truth is, the deadline was never real. The pressure was manufactured. The choice was always yours. But by the time you realize it, you've already given it away. Perception anchoring. Perception anchoring is a manipulation that subtly rewrites how you interpret reality by planting reference points that distort your judgment. Humans don't evaluate experiences in isolation. We compare them to whatever frame of reference is offered. Manipulators exploit this by deliberately giving you an anchor that shifts your perspective, making unfair or unhealthy circumstances seem acceptable. Imagine being in a relationship where your partner constantly compares your pain to someone who has it worse. Suddenly, your hurt feels invalid because you're anchored to a harsher example. Or picture a boss who piles work onto your desk, but frames it as still less than what others handle. You stop questioning whether the workload is fair and instead feel guilty for struggling. Anchoring doesn't change the reality. It changes the lens through which you see it. This tactic works because the human mind craves reference points. We measure salary not by its absolute value, but against what others earn. We judge effort not by our limits, but against what others appear to tolerate. Manipulators know that by presenting exaggerated comparisons, either grander sacrifices or harsher scenarios, they can make their behavior look normal, even generous. It's the psychological equivalent of dimming the lights so you don't notice how dark it's really getting. The damage of perception anchoring lies in how it rewires your self-permission. You stop trusting your instincts, stop measuring experiences by how they truly feel, and instead surrender to the narrative they set. Over time, you internalize their anchors, repeating them to yourself. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe I should be grateful. But those thoughts aren't your truth. They're the echo of the anchor. The manipulator doesn't just distort your perception of them. They distort your perception of yourself until you can't even see that you're drowning. Covert exclusion. Covert exclusion is a form of social cruelty that hides behind subtlety. Unlike outright rejection, it thrives in the shadows, where its denial can be weaponized. You are left on the outside, but never given enough proof to call it what it is. The manipulator carefully engineers situations where you feel left out, forgotten from group plans, ignored in conversations, or spoken over in meetings. And when you confront it, they deflect with innocence. "Oh, I thought you knew," or "You're imagining things." This tactic is especially devastating because humans are wired for belonging. To be excluded, even in small ways, triggers deep emotional pain. But when the exclusion is covert, the pain comes wrapped in confusion. Was it deliberate? Are you being paranoid? Should you say something or stay quiet? This uncertainty is the trap. The manipulator never has to own their behavior because they designed it to be invisible, deniable, and easy to dismiss. In friendships, covert exclusion may look like inside jokes you're never part of, invitations that mysteriously got lost, or plans discussed in front of you without being extended to you. In families, it can show up when your voice is ignored in decisions that affect you. In workplaces, it might take the form of being left out of emails, meetings, or conversations that undermine your ability to succeed. Each act is small, but together they create a heavy silence that says, "You don't belong here." The brilliance and cruelty of covert exclusion is that it wounds without evidence. You can't hold up proof of being ignored. You can't document an absence. And so you begin doubting yourself instead of them. You withdraw, shrink, and isolate further, unintentionally fulfilling the exclusion they engineered. Over time, you no longer just feel left out. You start believing you deserve to be. And that is how exclusion becomes not just an act, but an identity. Token listening. Token listening is perhaps one of the most deceptive forms of dismissal because it looks, on the surface, like care. The manipulator gives the appearance of listening, nodding, making eye contact, even repeating back a few of your words. But beneath the surface, they are not hearing you. They are biding time, waiting for their turn to speak, or gathering ammunition to use later. Their listening is a performance, not an act of connection. This tactic is particularly painful because it mimics what we most long for, to be heard, understood, and valued. When someone pretends to listen but never truly engages, it creates a dissonance. You walk away unsettled, wondering why you still feel unseen, even though you were heard. Over time, the subtle hollowness of token listening eats away at your sense of worth. You start to question whether your feelings are too complicated, your stories too boring, your needs too much. In reality, the problem was never you, it was the absence of true listening. In relationships, token listening can look like a partner who nods along while scrolling their phone, or who remembers small details but never the meaning behind your words. In workplaces, it shows up in managers who sit through complaints but never act, or colleagues who hear your input in meetings only to later claim the idea as their own. In friendships, it might appear as the friend who always asks how you are, but never sticks around long enough to hear the real answer. The cruelty of token listening is that it creates the illusion of being acknowledged without the substance of it. You are given just enough attention to keep talking, but never enough engagement to feel valued. And when you sense the emptiness, you may hesitate to bring it up, Because on the surface they did listen. That deniability protects the manipulator, while you are left carrying the silent weight of neglect. True listening is transformative. It heals, connects, and restores. Token listening, on the other hand, is a hollow shell, a counterfeit connection that drains rather than fills. It is manipulation disguised as attentiveness, control masquerading as care, and the more you fall for it, the lonelier you feel. Emotional pacing. Emotional pacing is a subtle manipulation tactic that carefully controls the rhythm of intimacy, distance, and emotional exchange in order to gain power over someone's state of mind. It is not random. It's a carefully orchestrated sequence of accelerations and slowdowns designed to disorient. At the start, the manipulator might overwhelm you with intensity. Long conversations, constant messages, deep confessions shared too early. This rapid closeness feels intoxicating, as though you've stumbled upon a rare soul connection. But just when you've adjusted to that level of closeness, they withdraw. Silence, coldness, delayed responses. The shift doesn't feel natural, it feels jarring, like a song that suddenly stops mid-note. This push and pull rhythm destabilizes your nervous system. You crave consistency, but instead you are placed on an unpredictable roller coaster. When they lean in, you feel special, chosen, alive. When they pull back, you panic, wondering what you did wrong. That panic drives you to chase them, to restore the intimacy that once felt so powerful. Without realizing it, you begin syncing your emotions to their rhythm, allowing them to control the beat of the relationship. In romance, this tactic can keep you emotionally addicted, never sure where you stand but unable to let go. In families, it can show up in parents who alternate between warmth and coldness, raising children who grow into adults desperate to earn approval. In workplaces, it appears as bosses who one moment praise your work and the next act indifferent, making you work harder just to regain their attention. The cruelty of emotional pacing is that it feels like passion, but is actually precision. It disguises control as chemistry, manipulation as love. Over time, your natural emotional rhythm, the steady heartbeat of your identity, becomes disrupted. You no longer move in our own flow. You move in theirs. And once your emotional timing is dictated by another person, your freedom isn't just compromised, it's surrendered. Contrarian disagreement. Contrarian disagreement is a manipulative tactic that thrives on perpetual opposition. It is the art of disagreeing, not because one believes differently, but because disagreement itself creates power. The manipulator positions themselves as the perpetual skeptic, the devil's advocate, the one who never fully agrees. To the unsuspecting, this may appear as independence of thought, intellectual sharpness, or a quirky personality trait. But underneath, it serves one purpose: to destabilize your confidence. When every idea you share is met with resistance, when every feeling you express is met with doubt, you begin to second-guess yourself. The manipulator may disagree subtly at first, raising eyebrows, asking challenging questions, planting doubt. Over time, their contrarian stance becomes predictable. They will argue the sky isn't fully blue, the facts aren't fully facts, your emotions aren't entirely valid. By never agreeing, they force you into a position of constant defense. You waste energy justifying yourself, explaining things that shouldn't need explanation, seeking validation that never comes. The brilliance of this tactic is that it cloaks itself as intellectual honesty. "I'm just playing devil's advocate," they'll say. Or, "I like to challenge ideas." Yet this challenge is rarely balanced. It is aimed at diminishing your certainty, not expanding understanding. In relationships, contrarian disagreement can make you feel perpetually misunderstood, unseen, and isolated. In workplaces, it's the colleague who resists every suggestion, making progress impossible unless things go their way. In families, it's the relative who always finds fault, ensuring you feel small at every gathering. Contrarian disagreement erodes confidence not by direct insult, but by slow erosion. Like waves against stone, each opposition wears down your certainty until you start to silence yourself, thinking, "Why bother? They'll disagree anyway." The manipulator wins, not because they were right, but because they exhausted your will to keep speaking. And once silence takes root, they have succeeded in controlling the narrative, not by adding truth, but by subtracting your voice. Premature disclosure. Premature disclosure is a calculated manipulation that masquerades as vulnerability. It happens when someone shares deeply personal information too early, creating an illusion of intimacy that hasn't been earned. They might reveal painful stories, traumatic memories, or confessions within the first hours or days of knowing you. On the surface, this feels disarming. Wow, they trust me this much already. But in reality, it's a tactic to fast-track closeness, lowering your guard before you've had the chance to assess their true intentions. Humans are wired to respond to vulnerability with empathy. When someone bares their soul, we instinctively want to comfort, support, and protect. Manipulators exploit this instinct by disclosing prematurely, tricking you into forming a bond before there's a foundation. You may feel compelled to share your own secrets in return, creating an imbalance where you reveal too much too soon, making yourself emotionally exposed. This tactic is powerful because it bypasses the natural pacing of trust. Normally, trust grows through consistent actions over time, shared experiences, proven reliability, mutual respect. Premature disclosure hijacks that process, giving the illusion of deep connection without the substance. In relationships, this can lead you into attachments that feel profound but are built on shaky ground. In friendships, it can tie you into one-sided bonds where you feel responsible for someone else's well-being before they've earned your loyalty. In workplaces, it can look like a colleague oversharing struggles to win sympathy or avoid accountability. The cruelty of premature disclosure is that it entangles you in someone else's story before you've chosen whether you want to be there. It binds you with invisible threads of responsibility, guilt, or affection, long before trust has been tested. Over time, you may realize that their openness was not a gift, but a hook. True vulnerability deepens connection because it comes with risk. Premature disclosure is not risk, it's strategy. And once you've been pulled into its net, escaping feels like betrayal, even though the trap was never yours to carry. Behavioral breadcrumbs. Behavioral breadcrumbs are subtle signals and hints dropped deliberately to lead you in a direction without the manipulator ever having to be clear about their intentions. These breadcrumbs are not accidental. They're carefully placed actions, words, or gestures that spark hope, curiosity, or pursuit. They might send you a late-night text but vanish the next day. They might hint at a future with you but never commit. They might show flashes of kindness only to retreat into coldness again. Each breadcrumb is just enough to keep you moving forward, chasing the trail, never realizing there is no real destination at the end. This tactic thrives because humans naturally seek patterns. When someone gives us fragments of attention or affection, we instinctively string them together into a narrative of potential. We think, maybe they're just busy, or they wouldn't say that unless they meant something deeper. The manipulator counts on this instinct. They don't need to provide consistency or clarity. They only need to provide enough pieces for you to build the story yourself. In romantic dynamics, behavioral breadcrumbs keep people stuck in endless waiting games. The manipulator dangles hints of love or commitment without ever following through, ensuring the victim invests time, energy, and emotions into something that never solidifies. In workplaces, it may look like vague promises of promotions or growth, keeping employees loyal to futures that never arrive. In friendships, it appears as someone who occasionally shows warmth or effort, just enough to stop you from walking away. The cruelty of breadcrumbs is that they turn your imagination into a weapon against you. You are the one filling in the gaps, investing hope, and building castles out of crumbs. Over time, this leaves you exhausted, chasing meaning in what was never real. The manipulator benefits by keeping your attention and loyalty without giving you anything substantial in return. Breadcrumbs are not connection, they are bait, and the more you follow them, the more you lose sight of your own path. Strategic incompetence. Strategic incompetence is the art of pretending not to know, not to understand, or not to be capable of something, all for the sake of avoiding responsibility. On the surface, it looks like weakness, forgetfulness, or clumsiness, but beneath it lies a deliberate calculation. If they appear incapable, someone else will step in and do the work for them. By acting confused, careless, or overwhelmed, the manipulator escapes accountability while others carry their burdens. This tactic is especially damaging in close relationships. A partner may repeatedly forget chores, mess up tasks, or insist they just don't understand how something works. After enough failed attempts, you give up and do it yourself. The outcome? They get to avoid the effort while you shoulder the load. In workplaces, it shows up when employees play dumb about responsibilities, forcing others to fix mistakes or handle tasks they just can't figure out. In families, it may look like a parent who consistently avoids difficult conversations or financial responsibilities by pretending ignorance. Strategic incompetence thrives on your patience. At first, you may believe them, thinking, maybe they really don't know how. But over time, you notice the pattern. It's selective. They are perfectly competent in other areas, but somehow incompetent only when it benefits them. The inconsistency is the proof. Yet even when you catch on, the trap holds. If you don't step in, the task goes undone. The cruelty of strategic incompetence is that it forces you into a double bind. Either you accept the burden yourself, or you live with the consequences of their failure. Either way, you lose and they win. The tactic erodes trust, drains energy, and leaves you carrying responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. It is not lack of ability, it is manipulation through convenience. Intentional amnesia. Intentional amnesia is a selective memory game used to dodge accountability and rewrite history. It isn't genuine forgetfulness, it's a performance. When confronted with past promises, harmful actions, or inconvenient truths, the manipulator shrugs and says, "I don't remember." By denying memory, they deny responsibility. Your lived reality is dismissed as something imagined, exaggerated, or irrelevant. And because memory is often subjective, this tactic makes you question your own. In relationships, intentional amnesia might appear when a partner conveniently forgets promises they made, arguments they started, or hurtful words they said. When you bring them up, they insist, "You're overreacting, I never said that," leaving you feeling like the unstable one. In workplaces, it can show up when a boss forgets agreements about pay raises or working conditions, forcing you into cycles of reminders and justifications. In families, it may take the form of a parent denying past neglect or cruelty, rewriting history as though your pain never happened. The tactic is devastating because memory is tied to identity. When someone denies your memory, they aren't just erasing an event, they're erasing your sense of truth. Over time, you begin to wonder if your recollections are distorted, if your emotions are overblown, if perhaps you really are imagining things. The manipulator gains power by presenting themselves as the stable historian of reality while painting you as unreliable. The cruelty of intentional amnesia is its plausibility. Everyone forgets things sometimes, so it's easy to give them the benefit of the doubt. But manipulators weaponize that doubt, hiding deliberate erasure behind the mask of human imperfection. Each denial chips away at your certainty until you no longer trust your memory. And when you can't trust your memory, you can't trust yourself. At that point, the manipulator no longer has to control you. You do it yourself, silencing your truth in fear of being wrong. Rescue sabotage. Rescue sabotage is a deeply cruel tactic because it exploits the human instinct to help. It begins with the manipulator presenting themselves as vulnerable, struggling, or in desperate need of support. They invite you into the role of savior, asking for your time, your resources, your energy, your emotional labor. At first, you feel honored, even needed. You believe your efforts are making a difference. But just when you pour yourself into rescuing them, they sabotage the very help they asked for. They dismiss your advice, reject your efforts, or make choices that undo the progress you tried to create. The manipulation lies not in the request for help, but in the cycle of futility it creates. You are drawn in by empathy and compassion, but every attempt to save them is subtly undercut. They don't want to be saved. They want you trapped in a loop of trying. And the more you fail to help them, because they ensure your help never works, the more responsible you feel for trying harder. You become emotionally invested in solving problems that were never meant to be solved. In romantic relationships, rescue sabotage often takes the form of a partner who thrives on crisis. They constantly lean on you for stability, but when you offer real solutions, they sabotage them, ensuring the cycle repeats. At work, it can be a colleague who always plays overwhelmed, asking for your assistance, but never following through, keeping you drained while they avoid accountability. In families, it may appear as a relative who dramatizes their struggles, but rejects every opportunity for healing, ensuring they remain the center of concern. The cruelty of rescue sabotage is that it disguises dependence as connection. You feel bonded to them through your efforts, but what you don't see is that your energy is being siphoned into a black hole. The manipulator doesn't want resolution. Tissue. Hey, want your endless attention, your constant attempts, your exhaustion. Over time, you lose yourself in their crises, carrying the emotional weight of someone who never truly wanted to stand on their own. It is not about salvation. It is about control through helplessness. Ghost gaslighting. Ghost gaslighting is a haunting form of manipulation because it warps not only your perception of the present, but also your relationship to absence. Unlike traditional gaslighting, which denies events that happened, ghost gaslighting focuses on things that never existed or were never said. It plants shadows of false memories into your mind, making you question whether your reality is reliable at all. A manipulator using ghost gaslighting might insist that you had a conversation you don't remember, accuse you of agreeing to something you never did, or claim you were aware of details you were never told. At first, these moments feel like harmless miscommunications, but repeated over time, they create a chilling effect. You start wondering, am I forgetting things? Is my memory broken? Could I really have missed that? Before long, you stop trusting your own recall altogether. This tactic is powerful because absence is harder to prove than presence. If someone denies an event you remember, you can argue for its reality, but if they insist on something that never occurred, you are left defenseless. How do you prove that nothing was said, nothing was promised, nothing was agreed to? The manipulator exploits this gap, weaving false threads into your memory until you begin to feel unmoored from your own mind. In relationships, ghost gaslighting can destabilize you completely. A partner may claim you made commitments you never made, forcing you into guilt or obligation. In workplaces, a boss may insist you received instructions that were never given, leaving you scrambling to cover perceived mistakes. In families, it may look like a parent rewriting history, insisting they told you things that were never spoken, leaving you in silent confusion. The cruelty of ghost gaslighting is that it creates a fracture between you and your own mind. The more you accept to air false memories, the less you trust your own. And once you stop trusting yourself, you become fully dependent on their version of reality. They don't just manipulate what you think. They manipulate what you believe you remember. That is not just deception, that is psychological haunting. Triangulation. Triangulation is a weaponized game of angles, where instead of resolving conflict directly, the manipulator brings in a third party to destabilize the dynamic. They may compare you to someone else, pit people against each other, or use the opinions of outsiders to validate their perspective. The goal isn't resolution, it's control through division. At its core, triangulation thrives on insecurity. By introducing a third person into the dynamic, the manipulator ensures you feel less valued, less secure, less certain of your place. In romantic relationships, this might look like subtle comparisons to an ex. They never acted like this, or they used to do this better. In friendships, it may take the form of constant name-dropping. Everyone else thinks you're overreacting. In workplaces, it shows up when a manager plays employees against one another, creating competition instead of collaboration. This tactic works because humans are wired to seek belonging. The moment a third party is introduced, we instinctively fear replacement. The manipulator leverages that fear, keeping us off balance and desperate to prove ourselves. And when we confront them, they often retreat into denial. I didn't mean it like that, or you're imagining things. The triangulation continues, invisible yet corrosive. The cruelty of triangulation is its ripple effect. It doesn't just harm your relationship with the manipulator, it poisons your trust in others. You begin to look suspiciously at the third party, wondering what they know, what they think, whether they secretly hold judgment against you. Suddenly, your circle of trust shrinks, and isolation grows. And isolation is exactly what the manipulator wanted. Triangulation ensures that you never feel secure enough to stand your ground. By constantly pulling in third voices, the manipulator keeps you chasing approval, questioning your worth, and fighting battles that should never have existed. It is not a triangle of connection, it is a triangle of control, and the only way to break free is to step outside of the shape entirely. Phantom standards. Phantom standards are invisible rules that manipulators impose, rules that are never clearly defined, yet always seem to be violated. They create expectations that shift like shadows, impossible to meet, because they were never meant to be met. The manipulator holds you to a bar that keeps moving higher, wider, or in a different direction entirely. No matter what you do, you fall short, because the standard was designed to make you fail. This tactic is devastating because it preys on your desire to do well, to be good enough, to earn approval. At first, you may think you misunderstood their expectations. You try harder, clarify, bend yourself into uncomfortable shapes. But when you finally deliver, the rules change again. Suddenly, the definition of enough has shifted. What was praised yesterday is criticized today. What seemed acceptable is now framed as careless. The manipulator doesn't set standards to guide. They set standards to control. In relationships, phantom standards appear as shifting rules of love. A partner might expect you to be affectionate, but when you are, they accuse you of being clingy. If you give space, they accuse you of neglect. In workplaces, it shows up when a manager criticizes you for not being proactive. But when you take initiative, they punish you for stepping out of line. In families, it can look like parents who constantly raise the bar. Whatever achievement you bring home, it's never enough, because the goalpost is always moving. The cruelty of phantom standards lies in their invisibility. You cannot win a game when you don't know the rules, and that is exactly the point. The manipulator doesn't want your success, they want your exhaustion. By keeping you chasing approval that never arrives, they ensure you remain dependent, insecure, and submissive. Eventually, you stop striving for clarity and start striving for survival, living in fear of the next invisible rule you'll break. That fear is the prison they designed, and your obedience is the key they keep in their pocket. Progress sabotage. Progress sabotage is the art of pulling the rug out from under you the moment you begin to grow, heal, or succeed. It is not always loud. It can be quiet, subtle, almost invisible, but its impact is crushing. Whenever you take steps forward, the manipulator creates obstacles, plants doubts, or undermines your momentum. They can't stand to see you thrive because your growth threatens their control. This sabotage takes many forms. It might look like a partner belittling your achievements just as you start feeling proud. It might be a friend suddenly withdrawing support when you pursue something new. In workplaces, it often appears as colleagues withholding resources, managers downplaying progress, or shifting deadlines so you can never quite succeed. Even in families, it may appear as guilt trips whenever you take steps toward independence. What makes progress sabotage so insidious is that it often comes cloaked in care. They may frame it as concern. Are you sure you can handle that? Or, as practicality, maybe you shouldn't aim so high. The words seem protective, but the intent is not to shield you from harm. It is to clip your wings before you realize you can fly. And if direct undermining doesn't work, they create crises at the very moment you're about to advance. You get derailed, not because of your failure, but because of sabotage that pulls your energy away from your growth. The cruelty of this tactic is that it turns your victories into battlegrounds. Instead of celebrating your progress, you brace yourself for sabotage. Instead of feeling supported, you feel watched, doubted, and sabotaged. Over time, you begin shrinking your goals, dimming your light, convincing yourself that staying small is safer. That is the manipulator's ultimate win, not just halting your progress, but making you afraid of even trying again. Conditional affection. Conditional affection is the counterfeit version of love, one that looks like care but is tied to obedience, compliance, or performance. It is affection given not freely, but as a reward. You receive warmth when you behave the way they want, and you are met with coldness, withdrawal, or punishment when you step out of line. Love, in this dynamic, is not unconditional. It is transactional. This tactic is particularly powerful because it taps into one of the deepest human needs, the need for love and acceptance. When affection becomes conditional, it trains you to monitor yourself constantly. You begin to adjust your behavior, silence your voice, and mold your identity to earn approval. Over time, you stop asking whether the relationship feels good. You only ask whether you are being good enough to receive love. In romantic relationships, conditional affection can appear as a partner who showers you with attention when you meet their demands but turns cold the moment you assert yourself. In families, it often manifests as parents who withdraw love when children disobey, conditioning them to equate worth with compliance. In workplaces, it can take the form of leaders who give praise only when employees sacrifice their well-being, withholding recognition when they set boundaries. The cruelty of conditional affection is that it rewires your emotional compass. Instead of seeing love as something to be shared, you begin to see it as something to be earned. You mistake manipulation for intimacy and mistake control for care, and the longer you live in this cycle, the more you internalize the lie that your worth is measured by your usefulness to others. True love doesn't vanish when you make mistakes, disagree, or assert your independence. Conditional affection, however, ensures that every act of self-expression feels dangerous. You learn to suppress who are just to keep love alive, until eventually, you realize the love you were protecting was never real. It was a leash disguised as a gift. Insecurity cultivation. Insecurity cultivation is a slow, methodical form of psychological warfare that aims to dismantle your confidence piece by piece. Unlike direct insults, which are easy to identify, this tactic works by planting seeds of doubt so subtly that you end up watering them yourself. The manipulator carefully identifies your vulnerabilities, your looks, your intelligence, your abilities, or your worth, and begins to feed them back to you in tiny doses of criticism, comparison, or teasing disguised as jokes. It starts with little comments. "Are you sure that's the best choice?" Or, "I don't think you're ready for that." At first, they seem harmless, but repeated over time, these words sink in, echoing in your mind long after they're spoken. Soon you find yourself hesitating before making decisions, second-guessing your talents, or seeking reassurance constantly. The manipulator doesn't need to tear you down in one blow. They slowly wear away your foundation until you no longer trust yourself. Insecurity cultivation thrives in relationships where you crave approval. A partner might constantly compare you to others, subtly reminding you that you fall short. A boss may highlight only your mistakes, never your successes, training you to believe you're barely competent. In families, parents may instill lifelong doubt by setting impossible standards, ensuring you never feel worthy of their pride. The cruelty of this tactic is that the manipulator doesn't carry the weight of tearing you down. You do. Once the seeds are planted, you water them with self-criticism, self-doubt, and shame. Over time, you begin to sabotage yourself, believing you are incapable, unattractive, unworthy. This not only keeps you submissive, but it also makes you dependent on the very person who cultivated the insecurity. You look to them for reassurance, comfort, or validation, even though they are the architect of your doubt. The real damage is that insecurity cultivation rewires your identity. You stop seeing yourself through your own eyes and begin seeing yourself through theirs. Your self-image becomes a distorted reflection shaped by manipulation, and the longer it continues, the harder it is to recognize the confident, capable person you once were. Illusion of choice. The illusion of choice is a deceptive tactic that masquerades as freedom, but is actually control dressed up in disguise. The manipulator offers you multiple options, making you believe you are choosing freely, but in reality, all the options lead to the outcome they already decided. You feel empowered because you made a decision, but the truth is that the boundaries of choice were rigged from the beginning. This tactic works because humans crave autonomy. We want to feel like our decisions matter, that our voice shapes our reality. Manipulators exploit this by creating false pathways. For example, a controlling partner may say, "You can either stay home tonight or come with me. It's your choice." But both options are designed to keep you under their influence. A boss might present two overwhelming deadlines, leaving you feeling in control of which to choose, while ignoring the fact that both are exploitative. Parents may say, "Do you want to clean your room before dinner or after?" making children believe they chose freely when compliance was inevitable. The cruelty of the illusion of choice lies in its psychological effect. You walk away thinking you exercised free will, yet you were never free at all. The manipulator gains compliance without resistance because you believe the outcome was yours. And when the consequences of the choice unfold, you blame yourself, not them. That misplaced accountability is part of the trap. Over time, living under the illusion of choice conditions you to accept limited options as normal. You stop asking, "Why are these my only options?" and instead focus on which option will cause you the least harm. This narrowing of vision makes it easier for the manipulator to control you because you no longer see the bigger truth. The only real freedom lies in rejecting the framework they built. The illusion of choice doesn't just steal your freedom. It steals your awareness of having lost it, and that makes it one of the most effective and invisible forms of control. Echoic Manipulation. Echoic manipulation is a psychological trick that mirrors your words back to you, but with a twist that serves the manipulator's agenda. At first, it feels like understanding. They repeat your concerns, your fears, your desires, making you feel deeply heard. But slowly, the echoes become distorted, reframed in ways that shift blame, instill guilt, or twist your meaning into something unrecognizable. What began as reflection becomes redirection. This tactic is particularly dangerous because it exploits one of the most intimate aspects of communication: trust in being understood. When someone echoes your words, you instinctively lower your defenses. You think, finally, someone gets me. But instead of validation, what you receive is manipulation. They use your own language as a weapon against you. If you say, I feel neglected, they might echo, you feel neglected? That's interesting because I've been the one neglected all along. If you say, I need space, they might respond, so you're abandoning me. In relationships, echoic manipulation makes you feel like you're drowning in your own words. Every statement you make becomes evidence against you, reframed until you are the problem. In workplaces, it can appear in meetings when someone echoes your ideas but subtly reframes them as their own, erasing your contribution while gaining credit. In friendships, it may show up as someone repeating your confessions but turning them into gossip, leaving you exposed. The cruelty of echoic manipulation is that it uses your voice to silence you. Instead of creating clarity, it creates confusion. Instead of feeling understood, you feel twisted. And over time, you may stop speaking altogether, fearing that anything you say will be echoed back as a distorted accusation. True listening reflects without distortion. Echoic manipulation, however, reflects with intention, to control, to disarm, to dominate. It is not an echo of empathy, it is an echo of power, and the more you allow it, the more your voice gets drowned out by the hollow repetition of your own words. Silence as punishment. Silence as punishment is one of the most emotionally brutal manipulation tactics because it weaponizes absence. Unlike shouting or direct confrontation, which at least give you something to respond to, silence leaves you trapped in a void. The manipulator deliberately withholds communication, affection, or acknowledgement, not because they are overwhelmed, but because they want to make you suffer. It's not an accident, it's control through emotional starvation. When someone chooses silence as a weapon, they are sending a loud message without words. You don't matter. Your voice has no weight. Your presence is not worth acknowledging. At first, you try to rationalize it. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're upset. But as the silence stretches, you feel the slow erosion of your self-worth. You replay every interaction, searching for the crime that warranted this punishment. The pain is doubled because it is invisible. No arguments to dissect, no accusations to defend. No words to heal from, just absence. In relationships, silence as punishment can take the form of the silent treatment, where a partner ignores you until you surrender. In families, parents may withdraw affection from children to enforce obedience, teaching them that love is conditional. In workplaces, a boss might freeze out an employee, excluding them from conversations or decisions to exert dominance. Each time, the victim is left to stew in uncertainty, guilt, and isolation. The cruelty of this tactic is that it places the burden on you to repair what you didn't break. The manipulator knows silence is agonizing because humans are wired for connection. Deprivation of that connection feels like rejection of existence itself. And so you chase, you apologize, you overcompensate, all to end the unbearable quiet. Over time, you become conditioned. You will do anything to avoid silence, and surrendering your needs and boundaries. But the truth is silence should never be used as punishment. Healthy silence is space to breathe, to reflect, to heal, not a weapon to wound. When silence is weaponized, it is not about distance. It is about domination. Microshaming. Microshaming is a manipulative tactic that works like death by 1,000 cuts. It is the art of delivering tiny, almost imperceptible shames so consistently that they accumulate into a heavy burden of self-doubt. Unlike overt criticism, which can be challenged, microshaming hides in small comments, subtle tones, facial expressions, or offhand jokes. Each act seems too minor to address, but together they carve away at your confidence. It might be the raised eyebrow when you share an idea, the sarcastic interesting when you express an opinion, or the exaggerated sigh when you make a small mistake. None of these alone are devastating, but their power lies in repetition. Over time, you internalize the message. I am foolish, I am not good enough, I should stay quiet. The manipulator doesn't have to shout to shame you. They drip-feed humiliation into your psyche until you carry it yourself. In relationships, microshaming may look like a partner who mocks your quirks in front of others, insisting it's just a joke. In families, it may come as constant little reminders of your flaws, the way you dress, the way you speak, the way you live. At work, it shows up when colleagues undermine your ideas with tiny dismissals, stealing your confidence without ever appearing openly hostile. The cruelty of microshaming is its deniability. When you finally speak up, you're told you're overreacting, that it was harmless, that you're too sensitive. This makes you doubt not just your perception, but your right to feel hurt. Over time, you shrink yourself, staying quiet, careful, invisible, believing that maybe you really are the problem. But microshaming is not harmless. It is a systematic dismantling of dignity designed to keep you small. It doesn't break you all at once. It makes you break yourself, one doubtful thought at a time. Subtle sabotage. Subtle sabotage is a manipulation tactic that works quietly, undermining you in ways so small they are almost invisible until the damage is undeniable. Unlike outright attacks, subtle sabotage doesn't announce itself. It hides in delays, omissions, accidental mistakes, or faintly undermining gestures that derail your progress without leaving clear evidence. It might be a partner who forgets to pass along important messages, a friend who always seems to distract you right before something important, or a colleague who withholds minor but crucial information, making your work incomplete. Each act can be dismissed as coincidence or carelessness, but over time, the pattern reveals itself. Your growth is being systematically obstructed. This tactic thrives because it provides plausible deniability. When confronted, the manipulator shrugs. "Oh, I didn't realize," or "that wasn't intentional." And because the sabotage is subtle, you often doubt yourself instead of them. You wonder if you're imagining things, if maybe you're paranoid, if perhaps the failure really was yours. That doubt is part of the design. The cruelty of subtle sabotage is that it steals your momentum. Success requires energy, persistence, and flow, and sabotage disrupts that flow again and again. It doesn't break you with one blow. It chips away at your confidence until you feel incapable of achieving anything. In relationships, it may leave you feeling unsupported, constantly stumbling just when you try to rise. At work, it can cost you opportunities, promotions, or credibility. In families, it ensures you never outshine the ones who fear your growth. What makes subtle sabotage especially painful is its invisibility to others. From the outside, it looks like you are simply unlucky, clumsy, or underperforming. Few people see the quiet hands pulling at the strings behind you, and so you carry the blame, while the manipulator quietly enjoys your struggle. Subtle sabotage is not an accident. It is control disguised as coincidence, sabotage hidden in plain sight. And its damage is profound because it convinces you that the problem is you, when in truth, the battlefield was rigged against you all along. False consensus. False consensus is a manipulation that exploits the human need for belonging by making you believe that everyone agrees with the manipulator's perspective. It creates the illusion of majority opinion, isolating you into silence and compliance. Phrases like, "everyone feels this way about you," or "most people think I'm right," are not casual statements. They are strategic attacks designed to make you doubt your individuality and fall in line with the supposed majority. This tactic works because our brains are wired to fear rejection. Social belonging is one of our most primal survival needs, and when we feel isolated, we instinctively bend ourselves to regain connection. Manipulators weaponize this fear by inventing consensus where none exists. They imply you are the outsider, the unreasonable one, the only person who sees things differently. Once you internalize this, your confidence falters. You stop asking, "Am I right?" and start asking, "Am I crazy?" In relationships, false consensus may appear as a partner claiming, "Even your friends think you're overreacting," when no such conversations ever occurred. In workplaces, A manager may say, "The whole team feels you're not pulling your weight, even if no one voiced concerns." In families, it may sound like, "Everyone knows you're difficult," creating shame and alienation without evidence. The cruelty of false consensus is that it doesn't need proof. It only needs your silence. Once you start doubting yourself, you stop speaking up. You retreat, shrink, and censor yourself out of fear of ridicule. This silence becomes self-reinforcing. Because you no longer challenge the claim, it begins to feel true. Over time, false consensus doesn't just control your actions, it rewires your sense of reality. You begin to see yourself as wrong by default, not because evidence proves it, but because the manipulator convinced you that everyone else already agrees. It is not truth. It is social manipulation disguised as truth. Monopolizing pain. Monopolizing pain is the act of dominating the space of suffering, ensuring that no one else's hurt can stand beside the manipulator's own. Whenever you express sadness, stress, or exhaustion, they immediately shift the spotlight back onto themselves, amplifying their struggles while minimizing yours. Your pain becomes a background note to their symphony of suffering. This tactic is cruel because it weaponizes empathy. Humans are wired to comfort those in pain, and when someone presents their suffering, we instinctively respond. But manipulators twist this instinct into a one-way street. They create an environment where your pain is invalid unless it serves as a stepping stone to highlight their greater wounds. If you say, "I'm tired," they reply, "You think you're tired? Let me tell you about my day." If you share a fear, they escalate. "That's nothing compared to what I've been through." Your suffering is erased, replaced by theirs. In relationships, monopolizing pain creates emotional suffocation. You feel unseen, unheard, and guilty for even daring to hurt. In families, it can manifest in parents who constantly center their own hardships, silencing their children's emotional needs. In workplaces, it shows up when colleagues or managers dismiss your burnout by competing with their own, ensuring empathy never flows toward you. The cruelty of monopolizing pain is that it isolates you even when you're hurting. Instead of receiving comfort, you end up comforting the very person who silenced you. Over time, you learn to suppress your pain, telling yourself it doesn't matter, it's not valid, it's not worth sharing. But suppressing pain doesn't heal it, it deepens it. And as the manipulator monopolizes more space, you disappear into silence, carrying burdens that were meant to be shared. True empathy is spacious. It allows for multiple pains to exist together. Monopolizing pain, however, is a form of emotional tyranny. It says, "Only my suffering matters, yours is invisible." And nothing fractures human connection faster than the denial of another's pain. Ingratiation. Ingratiation is the art of weaponized charm. On the surface, it looks like kindness, generosity, or praise. But beneath the surface, it is calculated flattery designed not to connect, but to control. The manipulator showers you with compliments, gifts, or favors, not out of genuine affection, but to build a debt you didn't agree to. Their goal is not to appreciate you, it's to make you easier to influence when the time comes. This tactic is effective because humans crave affirmation. Compliments feel good, gifts feel meaningful, and generosity feels safe. But ingratiation twists these gestures into tools of manipulation. Every "you're the only one I can count on," or "I couldn't do this without you," becomes less about appreciation and more about entanglement. The warmth of their charm makes it harder for you to resist future demands, because you feel indebted to their earlier kindness. In relationships, ingratiation can look like love bombing, lavish attention at the beginning, which later becomes a leash of obligation. In workplaces, it might show up when a boss praises you excessively before asking for unpaid overtime. In friendships, it appears as people who give gifts or favors that come with invisible strings, expecting loyalty, silence, or compliance in return. The cruelty of ingratiation lies in its disguise. Unlike outright manipulation, which you can resist, ingratiation feels pleasant. It lowers your guard, creating bonds that don't exist. And when the debt is finally called in, you find yourself trapped. How can you refuse someone who has been so kind? Over time, this tactic reshapes your boundaries. You begin saying yes to things you don't want, because saying no feels like betrayal. True generosity asks for nothing in return. Ingratiation always keeps a scorecard, even if it's hidden. It is not about lifting you up, it's about binding you closer, ensuring you become too entangled to walk away freely. Hollow apologies. Hollow apologies are apologies in appearance only, words that sound like remorse but carry no real accountability or intent to change. They are carefully crafted performances, designed not to heal but to pacify, to end a conversation, or to protect the manipulator's image. At first, they feel like relief. You hear the words, "I'm sorry," and for a moment you exhale. But as time passes, you realize nothing has shifted. The same patterns repeat, the same wounds reopen, and the apologies multiply into empty echoes. The manipulation lies in the language. Hollow apologies often come wrapped in qualifiers. "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "I'm sorry but you misunderstood." These aren't apologies, they are deflections, subtle ways of pushing the blame back onto you while appearing contrite. Other times they are excessively dramatic, with grand shows of regret but no follow-through. Tears, promises, and poetic words flow freely, but as soon as the moment passes, so does the sincerity. In relationships, hollow apologies keep you stuck in cycles of hope and disappointment. You forgive because you want to believe in their words, only to be hurt again when nothing changes. In families, it shows up when elders or parents demand forgiveness with a shallow "sorry," expecting decades of pain to vanish instantly. In workplaces, it appears as leaders who apologize publicly to protect their reputation, but never implement structural change. The cruelty of hollow apologies is that they exploit your longing for closure. You want the wound to heal, so you cling to the words even when they lack weight. Over time, you learn to lower your expectations, accepting counterfeit apologies as substitutes for accountability. And slowly, your sense of justice erodes. You begin to wonder if maybe you were expecting too much, if maybe words alone are enough. But words without action, a re-illusions. A true apology repairs. A hollow apology resets the cycle of harm, ensuring that nothing changes except your tolerance for mistreatment. Selective reinforcement is a manipulative conditioning tactic that rewards you inconsistently, shaping your behavior without you realizing it. The manipulator alternates between approval and withdrawal, affection and coldness, praise and criticism, training you like an experiment where your actions are measured not by fairness but by how well they serve their control. This tactic is powerful because the human brain is wired to respond to unpredictable rewards. Just like gamblers at slot machines, we chase inconsistent validation more intensely than predictable affection. The manipulator understands this psychology and exploits it. When you act in ways they approve, they flood you with warmth and attention. When you assert independence, they turn cold. The unpredictability keeps you hooked, constantly striving to earn the next moment of reward. In relationships, selective reinforcement creates emotional addiction. You feel euphoric when they give you affection, but devastated when it's withdrawn, leading you to chase them harder. In workplaces, it shows up when managers praise employees sporadically, keeping them overworking in hopes of earning recognition again. In families, it manifests in parents who alternate between love and disappointment, raising children who grow into adults addicted to external validation. The cruelty of selective reinforcement is its invisibility. Because the rewards do come, just not consistently, you convince yourself the problem is you. You believe that if you just try harder, you'll get the affection or recognition more often. But the inconsistency is intentional. It keeps you chasing endlessly, never secure, never stable. Over time, you stop making choices for yourself. You make choices to trigger their approval. Selective reinforcement doesn't just manipulate your behavior, it rewires your sense of worth. You begin to believe that love, care, or recognition must be earned through performance, leaving you vulnerable to endless cycles of emotional exploitation. Doubt seeding. Doubt seeding is the act of planting tiny, subtle questions that erode your confidence and destabilize your perception of reality. Unlike direct accusations, it doesn't shout, it whispers. The manipulator drops hints, asks leading questions, or makes passing comments that lodge in your mind like splinters. Over time, these splinters grow into forests of uncertainty. A manipulator might say, "Are you sure that's what happened?" Or, "Funny, I remember it differently." They might compliment you with a sting attached. "You did well, though I'm surprised, it's not usually your strength." These remarks don't outright condemn, but they force you to pause, to question, to doubt. And once doubt takes root, it spreads quickly. You begin second-guessing not just the event in question, but your memory, your instincts, your abilities, your worth. This tactic thrives in relationships where trust is vital. A partner may sow doubts about your friends or family, making you wonder who you can rely on. In workplaces, a colleague may subtly question your competence, eroding your credibility in front of others while smiling innocently. In families, parents may undermine children's confidence with casual remarks that echo for decades. The cruelty of doubt seeding is that it forces you to do the work of self-destruction. Once the seed is planted, the manipulator doesn't need to say more. You water it with your own anxiety, replaying the words until they feel true. The manipulator escapes blame by insisting they were just asking or just joking, leaving you looking oversensitive for reacting. Over time, doubt seeding hollows you out from the inside. You lose trust in your memory, your choice, your instincts, until you look to the manipulator for reassurance, the very person who created the doubt in the first place. It is not just a question of trust in them, it becomes a question of trust in yourself. And once that trust is gone, control slips into place like a lock clicking shut. Faux ignorance. Faux ignorance is a deliberate act of playing dumb, a manipulation that disguises knowledge as incompetence. The manipulator pretends they don't understand, don't remember, or don't know how to do something, all while fully aware of the truth. By feigning ignorance, they avoid responsibility, force others to step in, and maintain a shield of innocence that protects them from accountability. It begins subtly. They claim, "I didn't realize that mattered," or, "Oh, I didn't know you expected that from me." At first, you might give them the benefit of the doubt. After all, everyone makes mistakes, everyone forgets things, but with time, the pattern reveals itself. They are conveniently ignorant only when accountability is at stake, but strangely sharp when it benefits them. This tactic thrives in relationships where you want to believe the best in someone. A partner might pretend not to understand your needs, forcing you to repeat yourself endlessly until you begin doubting whether your requests were clear in the first place. In workplaces, faux ignorance appears as colleagues who forget deadlines or instructions, dumping their mess onto others while maintaining the image of being harmless or overworked. In families, parents may claim ignorance of their neglectful or harmful behavior, insisting they didn't know it hurt you, even when the evidence was clear. The cruelty of faux ignorance is its deniability. When you confront it, they retreat further into innocence. You're overthinking. "I truly didn't know." And because you cannot prove what someone truly knows in their own mind, you're left frustrated, spinning, unable to hold them accountable. Over time, this tactic erodes your patience, drains your energy, and conditions you to accept that they will never take responsibility. You begin to overfunction, cleaning up their messes, over-explaining your needs, or lowering your expectations. Faux ignorance is not a lack of intelligence. It is a strategy. It's not about not knowing. It's about pretending not to know long enough for you to take on the burden they refuse to carry. And each time you step in, you reinforce their act, allowing them to continue playing the role of the helpless innocent, while you drown in responsibilities that were never yours. Credibility erosion. Credibility erosion is the slow, deliberate dismantling of your reputation, your voice, and your ability to be believed. Unlike direct character assassination, which is loud and obvious, credibility erosion is quiet, spread in whispers, subtle contradictions, and small doubts planted over time until others begin to question your reliability. The manipulator doesn't need to openly attack you. They simply chip away at the foundation of your credibility until, when you finally speak the truth, no one trusts you. This tactic often begins with subtle comments. "Are you sure that's what happened?" or "That doesn't sound like you remembered it, right?" Over time, these doubts, repeated in front of others, create cracks in how people view you. The manipulator may exaggerate your mistakes, retell stories with slight alterations that cast you as forgetful or unstable, or frame your emotions as overreactions. Eventually, your image is no longer yours. It is theirs, rewritten and distributed quietly to those around you. In relationships, credibility erosion isolates you from your support system. A manipulative partner may tell others you're dramatic, emotional, or unreliable, so that when you speak out about their abuse, no one believes you. In workplaces, colleagues may quietly undermine your reputation, ensuring that your successes are downplayed and your errors magnified, eroding your professional standing. In families, it may appear as relatives spreading subtle narratives that paint you as the difficult one, regardless of the truth. The cruelty of credibility erosion lies in its longevity. By the time you notice it, the damage is often already done. Your words carry less weight, your truth is questioned, and your voice is muted not because it lacks honesty, but because it lacks credibility in the eyes of others. You are left shouting into silence, while the manipulator stands calmly, benefiting from the narrative they constructed. Credibility erosion is psychological suffocation. It doesn't silence you by force. It silences you by making others stop listening. And when no one listens, the manipulator wins complete control of the story. Drama inflation. Drama inflation is the deliberate exaggeration of events, emotions, or conflicts to distort proportion and distract from truth. It turns small disagreements into explosive battles, minor mistakes into catastrophic betrayals, and neutral events into crises. The manipulator inflates the drama, not because it reflects reality, but because it shifts focus away from what matters, keeping you trapped in chaos and emotional turbulence. This tactic often begins when the manipulator feels cornered, exposed, or threatened. Instead of addressing the actual issue, they manufacture chaos, raising their voice, crying loudly, slamming doors, or framing themselves as the ultimate victim. The original problem gets buried under the avalanche of noise. You find yourself apologizing, soothing, or defending against their exaggerated reaction instead of holding them accountable. In relationships, drama inflation keeps you emotionally exhausted. You tiptoe around small issues, knowing they will explode into full-blown wars. In workplaces, it appears when leaders overreact to small errors, creating a culture of fear that prevents people from speaking up. In families, it shows up as relatives who magnify disagreements into spectacles, forcing everyone else to manage their emotional storms. The cruelty of drama inflation lies in its ability to consume all the oxygen in the room. Once the drama takes over, there's no space left for truth, healing, or resolution. The manipulator benefits by redirecting attention. Suddenly, they are no longer accountable because everyone is focused on the chaos they created. Over time, this tactic erodes your stability. You become hypervigilant, anticipating explosions, shrinking yourself to avoid conflict. Your nervous system becomes trapped in survival mode, while the manipulator thrives in the chaos they engineered. Drama inflation is not just emotional immaturity. It is a weapon of distraction, designed to keep you too busy managing storms to ever see the quiet damage they are causing underneath. Backhanded compliments. Backhanded compliments are daggers disguised as praise. They sound like admiration at first, but hidden within them is a sting meant to destabilize your confidence. Unlike direct insults, which are easy to defend against, backhanded compliments slip under the radar because they carry a surface layer of flattery. This dual nature makes them deeply manipulative. They appear kind, yet they leave you second-guessing yourself long after the words are spoken. The manipulator might say, "You look good in that outfit. It's so slimming." The implication is that without it, you don't look good. Or they'll remark, "Wow, I didn't expect you to do so well on that project," suggesting your competence was never assumed in the first place. In social settings, they may disguise envy as flattery. "You're brave for wearing that. It's not for everyone." Every phrase is laced with a subtle poison that works not by striking hard, but by making you doubt yourself in silence. Backhanded compliments are especially damaging because they rob you of the ability to respond. If you protest, you look overly sensitive or defensive. If you accept them, you internalize the hidden insult. Either way, the manipulator wins because they get to undermine you without ever appearing openly hostile. In relationships, backhanded compliments chip away at self-esteem, training you to distrust praise. In families, they become a form of generational control, where parents disguise criticism as humor. In workplaces, they are used to assert superiority while appearing collegial, undermining confidence while pretending to encourage. The cruelty of backhanded compliments lies in their denial. If confronted, the manipulator will feign innocence. "I was just giving you a compliment," forcing you into self-doubt about whether you imagined the sting. Over time, you start to mistrust your own perception, unsure if the problem is the words themselves or your reaction. That confusion is part of the trap. A true compliment uplifts without condition. A backhanded one destabilizes, ensuring you never feel entirely secure, even in moments that should bring confidence. It is not praise. It is disguised sabotage. Personal space invasion. Personal space invasion is the silent theft of boundaries, a tactic that uses proximity as power. At its core, it is not about closeness, it is about dominance. The manipulator deliberately steps into your physical or emotional space, testing limits and asserting control without words. It's not intimacy they seek, it's authority over your comfort zone. The tactic may look harmless on the surface. A coworker leans too close during conversations. A family member rifles through your belongings without asking. A partner ignores your request for space, touching or hovering even when you've made your discomfort clear. Each act might seem small, but the underlying message is the same. Your boundaries don't matter. I decide how much space you get. This invasion isn't limited to physical space. Emotional and psychological space can be violated too. A manipulator may demand access to your private thoughts, insist on reading your messages, or pressure you into sharing more than you want to. They collapse the distance between you and them, making your life feel like an open book they are entitled to read. The cruelty of personal space invasion is that it forces you into silence. If you object, you risk being labeled rude, cold, or overreactive. If you don't object, you become complicit in your own discomfort. Over time, repeated invasions erode your sense of autonomy, making you feel smaller, suffocated, and powerless in your own environment. In relationships, this tactic destroys safety by turning closeness into control. In families, it conditions children to accept that their privacy and independence don't matter. In workplaces, it creates environments of intimidation where certain individuals dominate simply by refusing to respect space. Healthy boundaries are not walls. They are the framework of respect. When someone invades your personal space, they're not seeking closeness. They're testing how much of yourself you're willing to give up without resistance. Lowballing. Lowballing is a manipulative tactic that starts with false generosity and ends in exploitation. It works by offering something attractive at first, whether a promise, a price, or an opportunity, only to drastically reduce its value once you're already invested. By the time the real terms appear, you've sunk too much energy, time, or emotion to walk away. The manipulator relies on your commitment to trap you into accepting less than you deserve. This tactic is common in negotiations. A seller offers an amazing deal, then discovers hidden costs later. A recruiter paints a rosy picture of a job, only to reveal lower pay or longer hours after you've signed. In relationships, lowballing shows up as grand promises of love, loyalty, or change, which shrink into excuses and minimal effort once you're emotionally committed. Lowballing works because of the psychological principle of commitment bias. Once we commit to something, our brains resist walking away, even when the terms change. The manipulator knows this and exploits it. By the time you realize the offer isn't what it seemed, you've already invested too much. Quitting feels like losing, so you accept the lowered standard instead. The cruelty of lowballing is that it doesn't just take advantage of you, it conditions you to settle. Once you accept less than you were promised, the bar keeps lowering. Over time, you adapt to smaller and smaller offerings, convincing yourself that something is better than nothing. The manipulator counts on this erosion of expectation, tightening control with every lowered standard. Healthy exchanges are honest from the start. Lowballing is not about compromise, it is about deception. It hooks you with promises, then strips them away, leaving you clinging to scraps that were never worthy of you in the first place. Unfinished sentence bait. Unfinished sentence bait is a manipulation tactic where the manipulator intentionally leaves their words incomplete, dangling in the air like traps for your imagination. They begin with, "I could tell you something, but," or, "Well, I don't know if I should say this," and then stop short. This silence is not hesitation, it is strategy. By withholding the conclusion, they force you to fill in the blanks, and what you imagine is often far worse than anything they could have said aloud. This tactic works because human psychology craves closure. When a thought is left incomplete, the brain rushes to finish it, creating tension that demands resolution. Manipulators exploit this by leaving you hanging, knowing your own fears, insecurities, and doubts will rush to complete the unfinished sentence. They don't have to insult you directly, you'll do the work for them, spiraling into self-doubt, guilt, or anxiety. In relationships, unfinished sentence bait can sound like, "I just don't know if you're ready for," and then silence, leaving you wondering what they think you lack. In workplaces, it appears as a manager muttering, "I expected more from you, but never mind," forcing you to scramble with apologies and overwork. In families, it can be a parent sighing, "Well, you always were the type to," then leaving the rest unsaid, seeding shame without clear accusation. The cruelty lies in its vagueness. Because nothing is actually said, the manipulator can always deny intent. "I didn't mean anything by it," or "You're overthinking." Meanwhile, you're left carrying the weight of the unspoken, haunted by implications that feel more powerful than direct words ever could. Over time, unfinished sentence bait conditions you to constantly read between the lines, living in anticipation of criticism that never fully arrives. It keeps you on edge, anxious, and despera, to for clarity that never comes. This tactic doesn't wound with words, it wounds with absence, and sometimes the silence left behind can cut sharper than speech. Chronic comparison. Chronic comparison is the act of constantly measuring you against others, ensuring you never feel fully good enough in your own skin. It is not occasional feedback, it is a persistent drumbeat of reminders that someone else is smarter, prettier, richer, or more successful. Instead of nurturing your individuality, the manipulator reduces you to a competition you never asked to enter, ensuring you always come up short. This tactic works because comparison is one of the fastest ways to breed insecurity. When someone tells you, "Why can't you be more like them?" or "Look at what they've achieved at your age," it cuts deep because it reframes your life not as a unique journey, but as a scoreboard you're perpetually losing. Over time, chronic comparison rewires your self-image. You stop celebrating your own milestones because they never seem big enough. You stop appreciating your own traits because they don't match the fabricated ideal held up against you. In relationships, chronic comparison often sounds like, "My ex used to do this better," or "Other couples don't argue like we do." In families, it shows up in parents who compare children to siblings, cousins, or neighbors, instilling lifelong wounds of inadequacy. In workplaces, it emerges when managers pit employees against each other, fostering toxic environments where insecurity replaces collaboration. The cruelty of chronic comparison is that it doesn't just criticize, it erases. It denies you the right to exist as yourself, constantly demanding you measure up to someone else's life, body, or choices. And because the ideal is always shifting, you can never win. Even if you improve, the manipulator simply finds a new person to hold over your head. Over time, chronic comparison corrodes self-worth. You begin to see yourself not as whole, but as fragments of what you lack compared to others. You may even internalize the manipulator's voice, comparing yourself endlessly to everyone around you, long after they've spoken. This tactic steals joy from the present moment, making you live in a perpetual shadow of not enough. Healthy support uplifts individuality. Chronic comparison destroys it, replacing your identity with an endless, unwinnable contest. Social proof exploitation. Social proof exploitation is a manipulation tactic that weaponizes the human instinct to conform to the group. Social proof itself is neutral. It's the psychological tendency to trust and follow what many others appear to be doing. But manipulators exploit it by fabricating or exaggerating collective approval, making you feel pressured to comply because everyone else already agrees. This tactic shows up in statements like, "Everyone thinks this is the right choice," or "All your friends already said yes, why are you hesitating?" It can also appear in staged scenarios where the manipulator gathers allies, either real or imagined, to reinforce their narrative. By surrounding you with agreement, they push you into silence, because disagreement suddenly feels like rebellion against the group. In relationships, this may sound like, "All couples go through this, you're overreacting," invalidating your feelings by reducing them to something universally accepted. In workplaces, managers may pressure employees by saying, "The rest of the team is fine with this decision," even when it's untrue. In social circles, it appears as friends who weaponize group dynamics to force compliance. "We all think you should just let it go." The cruelty of social proof exploitation is that it isolates you without ever needing to prove anything. You feel like the odd one out, the only dissenting voice. And this social pressure compels compliance even when your instincts scream otherwise. And because the manipulator rarely shows evidence of this consensus, you're left questioning whether the crowd is real or invented. Over time, this tactic erodes your confidence in your own judgment. You stop asking, "What feels right to me?" and instead ask, "What will make me fit in?" The manipulator doesn't need truth on their side. They only need you to fear being alone. True consensus is built on open discussion. Exploited consensus is manufactured as a weapon. When social proof is twisted into control, individuality is erased, and silence becomes complicity. Victim inversion. Victim inversion is one of the most disorienting manipulation tactics because it flips reality upside down. Instead of taking accountability for harm they've caused, the manipulator positions themselves as the true victim. Suddenly, the person who hurt you is crying louder than you, demanding sympathy, and turning others against you by painting your reaction as cruelty. This inversion not only erases your pain, but traps you in a surreal role reversal, where you're expected to apologize for being wounded. This tactic works because humans are naturally inclined to comfort those who appear vulnerable. When someone cries, trembles, or acts wounded, our instinct is to offer empathy. Manipulators exploit this instinct by exaggerating their own suffering the moment they are held accountable. If you confront them about neglect, they'll insist you are attacking them. If you express hurt, they'll say your emotions are abusive. If you set boundaries, they'll claim you are abandoning them. In relationships, victim inversion creates constant self-doubt. You begin to wonder if you really are the aggressor, if maybe your pain is an overreaction. In workplaces, it shows up when manipulative colleagues play innocent after sabotaging others, crying foul when confronted. In families, it appears in parents who deflect responsibility by claiming their children are ungrateful for pointing out harmful behaviors. The cruelty of victim inversion lies in its theft of truth. It steals not just your voice, but your role as the injured party, leaving you silenced while the manipulator collects sympathy. Worse, it often succeeds because outsiders see only the performance, not the reality behind it. They rally around the manipulator while you're left isolated, bewildered, and shamed. Over time, this tactic can fracture your sense of justice. You begin to swallow your pain silently, fearing that voicing it will only turn you into the villain again. Victim inversion doesn't just twist perception, it makes you question your right to be heard at all. Subtext layering. Subtext layering is a manipulative tactic that hides meaning beneath the surface of words, creating conversations that operate on two levels at once. On the surface, the words sound innocent or neutral. Beneath, however, lies an implied insult, demand, or judgment. The manipulator uses tone, timing, or context to lace their statements with unspoken meanings, leaving you unsettled without clear evidence of wrongdoing. For example, they may say, "It's nice to see you finally dressed up for once," which on the surface is a compliment, but underneath is a jab at your usual appearance. Or they might remark, "Wow, you're really confident to speak about that," which appears supportive, but drips with skepticism. Every word becomes a double-edged blade, harmless in form, cutting in implication. This tactic thrives because it provides plausible deniability. If you call out the insult, they retreat behind the surface meaning, "I didn't mean it like that, you're imagining things." The layering of subtext ensures you feel the sting but can't prove it, making you doubt your perception. Over time, you may begin to gaslight yourself, wondering if you're oversensitive or paranoid. In relationships, subtext layering corrodes intimacy by filling conversations with hidden barbs. In workplaces, it allows colleagues to undermine one another without ever appearing openly hostile. In families, it manifests in parents or relatives whose words are dripping with concern, but are really criticism in disguise. The cruelty of subtext layering is that it forces you into an invisible war. Every interaction becomes a puzzle of hidden meanings, draining your energy as you analyze tone, context, and intent. You never get the relief of confronting the insult, because it always hides beneath plausible innocence. Over time, this erodes trust, not just in the manipulator, but in your own ability to read reality. Subtext layering doesn't communicate, it manipulates. It creates an environment where words are traps, and the burden of deciphering always falls on you. Deflection Game. The deflection game is a tactic designed to shield the manipulator from accountability by shifting attention away from their behavior. Instead of addressing the issue at hand, they redirect the focus onto you, onto irrelevant details, or onto fabricated distractions. It's less about solving problems and more about dodging them, leaving you frustrated, unheard, and guilty for even bringing them up. This tactic often shows up in conversations where accountability should be clear. If you point out their neglect, they may counter with, "Why are you always so negative?" If you express hurt, they'll respond with, "Well, you hurt me last month too." If you raise a valid complaint, they'll drag the discussion into unrelated territory. This is just like that time you... By the end of the exchange, you're no longer discussing their behavior. You're defending yourself, apologizing, or lost in irrelevant arguments. The deflection game works because it destabilizes the flow of dialogue. Accountability requires focus, but deflection scatters focus until nothing remains. Instead of clarity, you're left with a fog of side issues, distractions, and blame shifting. Over time, this trains you to avoid confrontation altogether because every attempt feels like walking into quicksand. You sink deeper the harder you try to stay on track. In relationships, the deflection game ensures one partner is always silenced. In workplaces, it appears in leaders who never own mistakes, constantly pointing fingers at employees or circumstances. In families, it shows up in parents who dodge responsibility by reminding children of sacrifices they made, flipping the narrative from accountability to guilt. The cruelty of the deflection game is its endlessness. There is no winning move, because the rules are designed to keep you chasing shadows. The manipulator doesn't need to prove innocence. They only need to prevent focus long enough for accountability to vanish, and in the chaos, you're left drained, confused, and silenced. Denial spiraling. Denial spiraling is a tactic that traps you in an endless loop of disbelief, dismissal, and distortion. It begins with the manipulator denying a single fact, but it never stops there. Each time you bring up evidence, they deny that too. Each time you point to memory, they deny the validity of your recollection. Each time you cling to truth, they widen the spiral, pulling you deeper into confusion until reality itself feels slippery. This tactic works because denial is a powerful weapon against certainty. Humans anchor themselves in shared reality. We trust our memories, our senses, and our ability to interpret events. But when someone constantly denies those anchors, they loosen your grip. You start by defending yourself with confidence, but as the spiral grows, you begin to falter. Did I remember wrong? Did I misinterpret? Could it really have happened differently? The manipulator doesn't need to win the argument. They only need you to lose faith in your own mind. In relationships, denial spiraling is common in gaslighting cycles. You confront betrayal or cruelty, but they deny it so convincingly, you begin to doubt your instincts. In workplaces, it shows up when leaders deny promises or agreements they made, leaving employees scrambling to prove what was once clear. In families, it can be generational, parents denying harm done in childhood, forcing children to question whether their pain is even valid. The cruelty of denial spiraling lies in its erosion of reality. Once you no longer trust your perception, you are left defenseless. Truth becomes negotiable, memory becomes suspect, and your identity itself feels unstable. Over time, this doesn't just silence you, it makes you dependent on the manipulator to define reality for you, since your own grasp feels broken. Denial spiraling doesn't argue truth, it dissolves it, and in its wake, it leaves a hollow version of yourself, constantly second-guessing the very ground you stand on. Reputation theft. Reputation theft is a manipulation tactic that hijacks your identity, stealing the image you've built and twisting it into something unrecognizable. Instead of attacking you outright, the manipulator quietly rewrites the way others perceive you. They distort your story, spread half-truths, and strategically craft narratives that replace your authentic reputation with one of their design. This tactic is especially devastating because reputation is social currency. It takes years to build trust, credibility, and respect, but only moments to tarnish them. Manipulators know this and weaponize perception to disarm you before you even speak. By the time you defend yourself, the damage is done. Your credibility is already weakened. Reputation theft often begins subtly. A manipulative partner may tell friends that you're unstable or controlling, laying groundwork so that any future complaints you voice are dismissed as hysteria. In workplaces, colleagues may steal your achievements while framing you as incompetent. In families, relatives may spread distorted narratives, casting you as ungrateful, selfish, or difficult, ensuring others doubt your truth before you even share it. The cruelty lies in the isolation it creates. When others believe the stolen reputation, your voice is silenced. You are forced to fight uphill battles, constantly explaining yourself against invisible scripts written by someone else. The manipulator doesn't need to be truthful. They only need to be first, planting seeds of perception that grow into weeds, choking out your real image. Over time, reputation theft can erode not only your relationships, but your sense of self. When the world reflects back a distorted version of you, it's easy to internalize the lie. You begin to question whether you are who you thought you were, or if perhaps their version of you holds some truth. That internal fracture is as damaging as the external loss of credibility. Reputation theft doesn't just attack your name, it attacks your reality. It robs you of the ability to be recognized for who you are, leaving you trapped in an identity you never chose. False reassurance. False reassurance is a tactic that cloaks control in the language of comfort. It sounds soothing, supportive, and protective, but underneath, it is dismissive and minimizing. The manipulator uses calming words not to truly care for you, but to shut down your concerns, silence your fears, and maintain control without addressing reality. On the surface, it feels comforting. They say, "Don't worry, everything will be fine," or "You're just overthinking, it's not a big deal." But these phrases are not meant to heal you. They are meant to pacify you into silence. Instead of validating your feelings, they trivialize them. Instead of solving problems, they smother them under a blanket of empty words. In relationships, false reassurance can keep you trapped in cycles of neglect or abuse. When you raise real concerns, they are smoothed over with gentle tones. "You're safe with me, stop stressing," even as their actions say otherwise. In workplaces, managers use it to downplay systemic issues. "Don't worry, leadership is handling it," when no real change is coming. In families, it shows up in parents who dismiss children's struggles with, "You'll be fine, it's nothing." The cruelty of false reassurance is that it weaponizes your longing for safety. You want to believe the soothing words, so you suppress your instincts. You swallow your fear, your doubts, your discomfort, convincing yourself the problem must not be real if they sound so calm. Over time, you stop trusting your own feelings, turning instead to the manipulator's words for guidance. But comfort without truth is poison. False reassurance doesn't heal, it numbs. It convinces you to stay still in dangerous places, silences your voice in moments you should be loud, and dulls the sharp instincts that are meant to protect you. True reassurance validates before it soothes. False reassurance silences before it comforts. One gives strength, the other takes it away. Faux neutrality. Faux neutrality is the illusion of impartiality used as a shield for manipulation. The manipulator pretends to stand above conflict, claiming they're just being neutral, when in reality, their passivity quietly benefits one side, their own. They present themselves as calm, rational observers, while using their supposed neutrality to invalidate your emotions, minimize accountability, or silence you into compliance. This tactic thrives on the social value of neutrality. We often equate neutrality with fairness, assuming that those who refuse to take sides must be wise and objective. Manipulators exploit this assumption by framing themselves as the only balanced party while painting you as emotional, biased, or irrational. In arguments, they'll say, "I don't want to take sides," yet their silence functions as support for the very behavior harming you. In relationships, faux neutrality appears when a partner avoids accountability by insisting, "I'm not choosing sides here," even as their refusal to speak out leaves you unsupported. In families, parents may use it to avoid confronting toxic dynamics, claiming to stay out of it while enabling abusive relatives. In workplaces, leaders often hide behind faux neutrality to dodge responsibility, insisting they're listening to both sides, but never actually intervening. The cruelty of faux neutrality is that it masquerades as peace while enforcing silence. By refusing to acknowledge harm, the manipulator keeps the power imbalance intact. Their neutrality is not absence of choice, it is a choice. And the choice always favors the status quo, the stronger party, or themselves. Over time, faux neutrality erodes your trust not just in them, but in your own ability to discern fairness. You begin questioning whether you're truly overreacting, whether your plea for justice is unreasonable. And while you wrestle with doubt, the manipulator enjoys the protection of their carefully crafted mask. Calm, rational, untouchable. True neutrality involves listening, validating, and stepping back only when fairness exists. Faux neutrality pretends to step back, but only so the harm can continue without challenge. It is not peace. It is complicity wrapped in the disguise of balance. Emotional invalidation. Emotional invalidation is the act of dismissing, belittling, or denying the reality of someone's feelings. It is one of the most corrosive manipulation tactics because it attacks the very core of human experience, the need to feel seen and understood. Instead of acknowledging your emotions, the manipulator tells you they are exaggerated, wrong, or meaningless, leaving you stranded in silence with your pain. Invalidation doesn't always sound cruel. It often comes in soft, minimizing phrases. You're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal, or you're too sensitive. These words may appear harmless, but repeated over time, they strip away your trust in yourself. You begin to doubt not just the intensity of your emotions, but the legitimacy of having them at all. In relationships, emotional invalidation turns vulnerability into a liability. When you share your struggles instead of comfort, you're met with dismissal. In families, it creates lifelong wounds. Children raised with constant invalidation grow into adults who suppress emotions, fearing rejection whenever they reveal their true feelings. In workplaces, leaders invalidate by downplaying burnout or stress, framing employees as weak for expressing human limits. The cruelty of emotional invalidation is that it creates an internal war. You feel hurt, but you're told you shouldn't. You feel angry, but you're told it's unreasonable. You feel anxious, but you're told it's silly. Over time, you begin to gaslight yourself, wondering if you can trust your own emotions at all. This self-betrayal leaves you vulnerable, disconnected from your instincts, and easier to control. True validation doesn't mean agreement, it means recognition. Emotional invalidation, however, denies recognition entirely. It silences the voice inside you that says, "This matters." And once that voice is muted, you become easier to bend, easier to break, and far less likely to fight for the respect you deserve. Performance guilt. Performance guilt is the manipulative strategy of tying your worth directly to your productivity, achievements, or sacrifices. It convinces you that unless you're constantly performing, working harder, giving more, achieving endlessly, you don't deserve love, rest, or dignity. This transforms life from a balance of effort and rest into an endless treadmill of guilt-driven striving. This tactic is particularly insidious because it often hides in cultural or familial conditioning. From a young age, you may hear, "You're only valuable if you achieve," or, "If you don't sacrifice, you're selfish." Manipulators reinforce this conditioning by rewarding you only when you overextend yourself and shaming you whenever you pause to breathe. In relationships, performance guilt looks like partners who withhold affection unless you constantly serve their needs. In families, it appears in parents who only show pride when you achieve, but respond with coldness or criticism when you rest or fail. In workplaces, it thrives in toxic productivity cultures, where employees are praised for burning out and shamed for setting boundaries. The cruelty of performance guilt lies in its endlessness. No matter how much you give, it is never enough. Achieve one milestone, and the next appears instantly. Meet one expectation, and another rises higher. The manipulator ensures you are forever chasing approval that never fully arrives. And each time you fall short, which is inevitable, you are drowned in shame, believing your worth has collapsed with your performance. Over time, this tactic strips you of your humanity. You forget how to exist outside of achievement. You measure your value not by who you are, but by what you produce. Rest feels like laziness, joy feels undeserved, and failure feels like proof that you are unworthy of love. Performance guilt does not push you toward greatness. Sinlet chains you to exhaustion. True worth is not conditional. True love does not demand endless sacrifice. Performance guilt is not motivation. It is enslavement disguised as expectation. Proximity minding. Proximity minding is the subtle manipulation of presence. using physical closeness, selective nearness, or calculated distance as a tool of control. Unlike overt words or actions, this tactic works in silence, with the manipulator deliberately deciding when to hover, when to withdraw, and when to position themselves in ways that unsettle or dominate you. At first glance, it can appear harmless. A partner lingers just a little too close when you've asked for space. A colleague consistently just happens to be nearby whenever you're working, monitoring your every move. A family member deliberately withdraws from the room when you most need comfort, leaving you to stew in isolation. None of these acts are accidental. They are strategic choices meant to regulate your emotional state. This works because humans are deeply sensitive to proximity. Closeness can signal intimacy or threat, while distance can signal rejection or neglect. Manipulators exploit this sensitivity, using their presence as a leash. They may hover to create pressure, stand too close to intimidate, or disappear suddenly to punish. You are left constantly recalibrating, hyper-aware of their position, distracted from your own needs and focused only on theirs. The cruelty of proximity minding is that it erodes your sense of autonomy. Your body is no longer your own. Your comfort is dictated by someone else's movements. Over time, you internalize the control, shrinking yourself to avoid closeness, chasing after them when they withdraw, or adjusting your entire rhythm around their presence. In relationships, proximity minding transforms intimacy into dominance. In workplaces, it becomes surveillance disguised as coincidence. In families, it teaches children that safety can be withdrawn at will, leaving deep scars of anxiety and hypervigilance. Healthy presence honors space and respects boundary. Manipulative presence, however, turns proximity into a weapon, sometimes suffocating you with closeness, other times starving you with distance, but always keeping you on edge. Moral leveraging. Moral leveraging is the act of using morality as a weapon to control others. Instead of appealing to fairness or compassion in genuine ways, the manipulator twists ethical language to shame you, silence you, or push you into compliance. They claim the moral high ground not to embody it, but to wield it like a club. This tactic often begins with phrases like, "A good person would do this," or, "If you really cared, you'd agree." By framing their demand as the ethical choice, they trap you between compliance and guilt. To say no feels selfish, heartless, or immoral, even if their request is unreasonable. In relationships, moral leveraging can appear as, "If you loved me, you'd forgive me," or "Real partners don't keep score." In families, it takes the form of parents or relatives saying, "After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me." In workplaces, it appears when leaders frame exploitation as virtue. "We're a family here. Everyone sacrifices." The cruelty of moral leveraging is that it hijacks your values. It doesn't simply ask for compliance. It makes resistance feel like a betrayal of your deepest principles. Over time, you begin to doubt whether your boundaries are selfish, whether your needs are greedy, whether your no is proof you are unkind. The manipulator doesn't just take your freedom of choice. They reshape your identity, making you feel morally stained for protecting yourself. True morality is about fairness, compassion, and mutual respect. Moral leveraging, however, is about domination disguised as righteousness. It isn't about doing what's right. It's about doing what serves the manipulator while convincing you that resisting makes you wrong. Invisible scoreboard. The invisible scoreboard is a manipulative system in which every act of kindness, sacrifice, or effort you make is secretly recorded, twisted, and eventually used against you. The manipulator tallies everything in silence, carrying a mental ledger of debts and credits that you never agreed to track. When the time comes, they slam the scoreboard down like evidence, reminding you of all they've done, while highlighting all you supposedly haven't. This tactic works because relationships thrive on reciprocity. When someone gives, we naturally feel inclined to give back. Manipulators exploit this instinct by exaggerating their contributions and downplaying yours, making you feel perpetually indebted. They might say, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me," or "I've always been there for you. Why can't you do this one thing?" The scoreboard is never balanced. It always tilts in their favor. In relationships, it becomes emotional blackmail. Love is framed as a debt you must repay endlessly. In families, parents may weaponize sacrifices, reminding children of years of effort to demand obedience. In workplaces, managers exploit it by framing exploitation as generosity. We gave you this opportunity, now you owe us loyalty. The cruelty of the invisible scoreboard lies in its distortion of reality. It takes genuine acts of care or sacrifice and twists them into chains. Instead of gifts freely given, they become debts that hang over your head forever. And because the scoreboard is invisible, known only to the manipulator, you can never win. The goalposts move endlessly, ensuring you remain in a state of guilt and obligation. Over time, this tactic erodes the joy of reciprocity. Instead of giving freely, you give out of fear of falling behind. Instead of receiving gratefully, you receive with dread, knowing it will be added to the ledge. The manipulator doesn't nurture connection. They turn love, family, or friendship into a transactional prison where you are always behind. True connection doesn't keep score. Invisible scoreboards aren't about fairness. They're about control, ensuring that no matter how much you give, the manipulator always deserves more. Hyper-rationalizing. Hyper-rationalizing is a tactic where the manipulator drowns emotions in a flood of logic, using excessive reasoning to strip your feelings of legitimacy. On the surface, it looks intellectual, calm, and composed. They act as if they are simply analyzing the situation objectively, but beneath that calm exterior lies a weapon, logic twisted into a cage that suffocates your lived emotional reality. This tactic works because society often elevates rationality above emotion, framing feelings as irrational, messy, or weak. Manipulators exploit this bias by insisting every emotional response must be justified with evidence or reason. If you're hurt, they'll say, "That doesn't make sense. Why would you feel that way?" If you're angry, they'll respond, "You're overreacting. Look at it logically." The message is clear. Your feelings are not valid unless they can be mathematically proven. In relationships, hyper-rationalizing silences vulnerability. You may share pain, only to have it dissected, reframed, and dismissed until it feels foolish. In workplaces, leaders may use it to invalidate burnout, claiming you have no reason to be tired. The workload is the same for everyone. In families, it can appear in parents who deny children's emotions by demanding logical explanations for feelings that are, by nature, beyond logic. The cruelty of hyper-rationalizing is that it erodes your trust in your inner world. Over time, you begin second-guessing your instincts, analyzing every feeling until it withers away under scrutiny. Instead of honoring emotions as real, you treat them as problems to be explained away. This disconnect leaves you vulnerable, unable to rely on the intuitive signals that are meant to guide and protect you. True rationality and emotion are not enemies, they are partners. Hyper-rationalizing, however, amputates one half of human experience, leaving you hollow, silenced, and endlessly apologetic for simply feeling. Shifting baseline. Shifting baseline is a manipulation tactic that slowly lowers your standards, adjusting what you accept as normal until you tolerate things you once swore you never would. It doesn't happen overnight. It works in increments, each change so subtle that you barely notice until you are living in a reality that would have horrified your past self. The manipulator begins by pushing small boundaries. A cutting joke here, a small lie there, a tiny act of neglect brushed off as no big deal. Each time you adjust, telling yourself it's just once, it's not serious, it won't happen again. But then the behavior escalates, slowly, steadily, step by step. Before long, what was once shocking becomes familiar, and what was once unacceptable becomes routine. This works because humans adapt. We normalize environments over time, even toxic ones, especially when change is gradual. Manipulators exploit this adaptability, ensuring you never notice the ground shifting beneath your feet. In relationships, this may look like tolerating increasing levels of disrespect until you barely recognize yourself. In workplaces, it appears as workloads or exploitation increasing bit by bit until burnout feels inevitable. In families, it manifests in cycles of control where each generation accepts more dysfunction than the last. The cruelty of shifting baseline is that it robs you of perspective. By the time you realize how far things have gone, you feel too entangled to escape. You may even blame yourself. I let it happen, so maybe I deserve it. That self-blame is part of the trap. It keeps you compliant, even as your world shrinks. Shifting baseline doesn't just change your environment, it reshapes your identity. You forget what safety feels like, what respect looks like, what love is supposed to mean. And once your baseline has shifted, it takes immense strength to reset it, to walk away, and to demand the standards you should have never abandoned. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most devastating and well-known manipulation tactics, because it attacks not just your emotions, but your entire grasp on reality. The manipulator denies your experiences, rewrites events, and twists facts until you no longer trust your own mind. It's not just lying, it's erasing your truth and replacing it with theirs. It begins subtly. You point out something that hurt you, and they respond, "That never happened," or "You're imagining things." At first you fight back, confident in your memory, but as the denials multiply, the cracks form. They might move your belongings and insist you misplace them. They might say cruel things and then deny ever saying them. They might flip your reactions around. You're too sensitive. You're crazy. You're paranoid. Slowly your certainty dissolves. Gaslighting is especially cruel because it turns the victim into their own jailer. Once doubt takes root, you begin second-guessing yourself even without their input. Every thought, every memory, every feeling becomes a question mark. You apologize for things you didn't do, defend yourself against crimes that never happened, and cling desperately to the manipulator for clarity, the very person destabilizing you. In relationships, gaslighting breaks identity itself. In workplaces, it silences employees by convincing them their concerns are all in their head. In families, it creates generational wounds where children grow up unable to trust their memories or instincts, carrying that fracture into adulthood. The cruelty of gaslighting is total. It doesn't just make you question events, it makes you question your sanity. It dismantles your relationship with yourself, leaving you dependent on the manipulator to define what is real. And once you lose that anchor, their control is complete. Gaslighting isn't just manipulation, it's psychological erosion. And the scars it leaves can take years to heal, because the damage wasn't only in the abuse itself. It was in the way it taught you to betray your own mind. Love bombing. Love bombing is one of the most intoxicating manipulation tactics because it disguises control as passion. At first, it feels like a dream. Lavish affection, constant attention, endless praise. The manipulator showers you with gifts, words, and promises so overwhelming that you can't help but feel chosen, adored, and irreplaceable. But beneath the glittering surface lies a calculated design. The goal is not love, it's dependency. Love bombing works by hijacking your nervous system. Humans naturally crave connection and validation. And when someone floods you with it, your brain releases dopamine and oxytocin, creating a chemical high. You feel euphoric, addicted to the warmth of their presence. But just as quickly as it comes, it can be withdrawn. That sudden coldness after the storm of affection leaves you desperate, chasing the high, willing to overlook red flags just to feel that rush again. In relationships, love bombing often marks the beginning of toxic cycles. The manipulator promises forever, paints visions of perfect futures, and convinces you that what you share is once in a lifetime. Then, when you're fully invested, the mask slips, the affection slows, criticism creeps in, and the very person who made you feel like royalty begins to treat you like a burden. In workplaces, leaders may love bomb employees with exaggerated praise and family culture, only to exploit them with unpaid sacrifices once loyalty is secured. In families, parents may oscillate between smothering affection and cold neglect, keeping children emotionally tethered. The cruelty of love bombing is its bait and switch. It makes you believe you've found something extraordinary, only to weaponize that belief against you. Over time, it conditions you to tolerate neglect or abuse in the hope of regaining the love you once had. You begin to doubt yourself. Maybe if I try harder, too, that version of them will come back. But that version was never real. It was a mask designed to hook you. True love grows steadily, rooted in consistency and respect. Love bombing is not growth. It's entrapment dressed as intensity. Negging. Negging is the subtle art of giving compliments laced with insults, designed to destabilize your confidence while keeping you hooked on the manipulator's approval. It often masquerades as humor, sarcasm, or just being honest. But its true function is to chip away at your self-esteem until you start chasing validation from the very person eroding it. Negging works because it creates confusion. You're told something flattering and demeaning in the same breath, leaving you unsure how to feel. For example, "You're pretty for someone who doesn't usually try," or "I like that you're not obsessed with being smart like other people." These statements give with one hand and take with the other, leaving you off balance. The manipulator appears charming and witty, but underneath they're pulling at your insecurities. In dating, negging is notorious. It's often used to create attraction through destabilization. By lowering your confidence, the manipulator positions themselves as the source of future validation. In relationships, it becomes a constant background noise of micro-insults disguised as playfulness, training you to accept degradation as intimacy. In workplaces, colleagues may use negging to undermine confidence in front of others while appearing humorous. In families, it shows up in the form of teasing that cuts too deep but is excused as harmless. The cruelty of negging lies in its deniability. When you object, the manipulator laughs it off. "Relax, it was just a joke." This not only silences your protest, but makes you feel overly sensitive for being hurt. Over time, the cycle wears you down. You start to crave their approval more intensely, hoping that one day their compliments will arrive untainted. But they never do, because the entire tactic relies on keeping you slightly insecure, slightly dependent, always hungry for more. Negging is not humor. It is no charm. It is erosion disguised as banter, designed to strip away your self-worth, while making you complicit in the laughter that destroys you. Stonewalling. Stonewalling is the weaponization of silence and withdrawal, a tactic designed not just to avoid conflict, but to suffocate communication entirely. When a manipulator stonewalls, they refuse to engage. No responses, no eye contact, no acknowledgement of your words. It's not a pause to cool down. It's a deliberate shutting down meant to punish and control. This tactic works because communication is the lifeblood of relationships. When it is cut off, the victim is left in limbo, desperate to reconnect. The manipulator knows this and uses stonewalling to place you in emotional exile. You might beg, plead, or apologize just to get them to speak again, even when you've done nothing wrong. The silence becomes a cage where the only key is compliance. In relationships, stonewalling often follows conflict. Instead of working through issues, one partner shuts down completely, leaving the other suffocating in the absence of dialogue. In workplaces, it can appear when leaders ignore concerns, emails, or requests, leaving employees powerless. In families, it shows up in parents who withhold attention from children as punishment, teaching them that love is conditional. The cruelty of stonewalling is that it denies you humanity. To be ignored is to be treated as invisible, as if your voice, presence, and existence have no weight. Over time, this erodes self-worth, conditioning you to chase scraps of acknowledgement just to feel real again. Worse, it silences conflict resolution. Problems pile up, never addressed, never healed, while you carry the burden of both the silence and the unresolved wounds. True silence can be healing when it's used as reflection or calm, but stonewalling is not reflection. It's rejection. It is not a pause. It's a punishment. And in its emptiness, it says loudly, "You do not matter until I decide you do." Future faking is the manipulator's weapon of false promises, a tactic that dangles the illusion of a better tomorrow to control you today. It floods you with visions of shared goals, big dreams, and emotional security, but these futures are never meant to materialize. They are bait, carefully crafted to keep you invested, hopeful, and tethered to a relationship or situation that offers little in the present. This tactic often begins with intoxicating language. "We're going to buy a house together one day," or "I see us traveling the world, raising a family, living the life we always wanted." These promises are vivid, filled with detail, delivered with conviction. They work because hope is a powerful drug. The thought of a brighter future softens the pain of the present, making you endure neglect, disrespect, or even abuse while waiting for the someday that never arrives. In relationships, future faking hooks you with the dream of marriage, children, or stability, even as the present is unstable and toxic. In workplaces, leaders may future fake employees with promises of promotions, raises, or recognition that never come, keeping them overworked and underpaid in the meantime. In families, parents may dangle approval or inheritance as future rewards for compliance, keeping children locked in cycles of obedience. The cruelty of future faking lies in its theft of time. It convinces you to postpone your needs, your standards, and your boundaries in exchange for a fantasy. By the time you realize the promises were empty, months or years may have passed. You look back and see a trail of waiting, hoping, sacrificing, all for dreams that were never meant to be delivered. True commitment builds the future in the present, brick by brick, through consistent action. Future faking offers blueprints, but never lays a single stone. It is not hope. It is manipulation wrapped in the language of destiny. Blame shifting. Blame shifting is the manipulator's art of dodging responsibility by hurling it back at you. No matter the situation, no matter how clear their role, they twist the narrative until you're left carrying the fault. Instead of admitting mistakes, they deflect, distract, and redirect, ensuring accountability never sticks to them. This tactic works because guilt is heavy, and manipulators know you'll take it on if they frame it well enough. If you confront them about a broken promise, they'll say, "Well, you didn't remind me." If you point out hurtful words, they'll reply, "I only said that because you pushed me." Every confrontation becomes a mirror turned against you, reflecting accusations that make you doubt your own role. In relationships, blame shifting erodes trust and accountability. You raise concerns only to end up apologizing for things you didn't do. In workplaces, it appears as leaders who never own failures, instead scapegoating employees. In families, parents may rewrite history, placing responsibility for their choices onto their children's shoulders. The cruelty of blame shifting is that it makes you fight battles on two fronts. You're already dealing with the harm they caused, but now you're also defending yourself against accusations. This double burden leaves you exhausted, confused, and more likely to surrender just to end the conflict. Over time, you may even internalize the blame, apologizing reflexively, convinced you are always at fault. Blame shifting doesn't just dodge responsibility, it transfers it. It makes the victim carry both the wound and the guilt, while the manipulator walks away clean, untouchable, and unaccountable. Projection. Projection is the psychological sleight of hand where the manipulator takes their own flaws, insecurities, or wrongdoings and attributes them to you. Instead of owning their shadows, they hurl them outward, forcing you to carry traits that aren't yours. They lie, but accuse you of dishonesty. They feel jealousy, but insist you're the insecure one. They manipulate, but call you manipulative. This tactic is powerful because it destabilizes your sense of self. When someone you care about accuses you of behaviors you despise, you can't help but pause. You wonder if they see something in you that you can't. You begin defending yourself against false accusations, which ironically shifts the focus away from their actual behavior. In the chaos of defense, their original wrongdoing slips out of sight. In relationships, projection creates endless cycles of conflict. Instead of addressing their own betrayal or insecurity, they keep you on trial. In workplaces, it can appear when dishonest leaders accuse others of dishonesty, shielding their own corruption. In families, projection may show up in parents who cast their unresolved wounds onto their children, blaming them for qualities the parents secretly despise in themselves. The cruelty of projection is that it forces you to hold a distorted mirror. Over time, you begin to question whether the accusations hold truth, even when your conscience is clear. This erosion of self-trust weakens your identity, making you more pliable to control. Meanwhile, the manipulator enjoys the safety of keeping their own flaws hidden in plain sight, disguised as yours. Projection isn't just denial, it's weaponized denial. It's the act of making you carry their shadows so they can walk in stolen light. And the more you fight to prove your innocence, the more deeply their deception takes root. Breadcrumbing is the manipulator's tactic of giving you just enough attention, affection, or hope to keep you hanging on, but never enough to truly satisfy your needs. Like a trail of crumbs leading nowhere, it lures you forward step by step, convincing you that fulfillment is just around the corner. But the truth is, the crumbs are all you'll ever get. This tactic works because humans are wired to respond to intermittent rewards. When affection, validation, or opportunities arrive inconsistently, the brain clings even harder, desperate to earn the next morsel. A manipulator knows this and carefully measures out their attention. An unexpected compliment here, a text after days of silence, a vague promise of someday. It's just enough to reignite hope, to keep you waiting. to make you invest more of yourself into the void. In relationships, breadcrumbing often shows up in modern dating. Occasional flirty messages, plans that never solidify, promises of commitment that never arrive. It keeps you tethered, always waiting for the next spark. In workplaces, breadcrumbing appears when leaders dangle the possibility of promotions or recognition, offering small hints of progress but never delivering real advancement. In families, it manifests as sporadic affection from parents, moments of love scattered between long stretches of neglect, keeping children hungry for more. The cruelty of breadcrumbing lies in its wastefulness. It doesn't just waste your time, it wastes your hope. It conditions you to lower your expectations, to accept crumbs as though they were a feast, to convince yourself that something is better than nothing. Over time, it erodes your standards until you begin to doubt you deserve more. Breadcrumbing doesn't nourish, it starves. It leaves you perpetually hungry, always chasing, never arriving. True love, true recognition, true care doesn't come in crumbs. It comes in consistency. Anything less is manipulation disguised as possibility. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is one of the most punishing manipulation tactics because it weaponizes absence and turns it into psychological torment. Unlike a healthy pause, which allows emotions to cool and reflection to occur, the silent treatment is deliberate abandonment in the middle of connection. It says without words, "You are invisible. You do not matter until I decide you do." This tactic works because humans are social creatures who rely on acknowledgement to feel secure. When someone you care about suddenly withdraws all communication, it creates panic. Your nervous system interprets the silence as rejection, abandonment, or danger. You begin scrambling to restore connection, apologizing, pleading, over-explaining, just to hear a word again. The manipulator knows this, and the silence becomes a leash, pulling you into compliance. In relationships, the silent treatment often follows conflict. Instead of addressing issues, the manipulator withdraws completely, forcing you to shoulder both the problem and the burden of reconciliation. In workplaces, leaders may use it by ignoring employees' concerns or freezing them out of conversations, exerting control through exclusion. In families, it can appear in parents who withhold love and communication, teaching children that affection is conditional on obedience. The cruelty of the silent treatment lies in its ambiguity. Unlike yelling, which is clear, silence leaves you drowning in uncertainty. You don't know how long it will last, what you did wrong, or how to fix it. The lack of closure keeps you spinning, trapped in self-blame. Over time, this tactic erodes your self-worth, training you to beg for basic acknowledgement, to accept neglect as normal. To equate love with pain, silence can be sacred when chosen mutually. But weaponized silence is violence. It wounds not with words, but with their absence. And often, the scars it leaves are deeper than those left by shouting, because they cut into the very core of existence. The need to be seen, heard, and recognized as human,